Chapter 1. From San Francisco to London. When I was 27 years old, I worked in an office in San Francisco. I did my job well, and my future was promising. I was alone in the world and I was happy. On Saturday afternoons I didn't work. I sailed my little sailboat on San Francisco Bay. One Saturday afternoon, I sailed out too far. The strong afternoon wind pushed my sailboat out of the bay into the Pacific Ocean. That night, when I had lost all hope, a small British brig saw me and took me on board. The brig was sailing to London. The voyage was long and stormy. I worked as a sailor to pay for my trip. When I arrived in London, my clothes were old and dirty. I had only $1 in my pocket. With this dollar, I ate and slept for the first 24 hours. During the next 24 hours, I didn't eat and didn't sleep. At about 10 o'clock the following morning, I went to Portland Place. I saw a child walking past, holding a big pear. The child ate one small piece and then threw the pear onto the street. I stopped and looked at it. I was very hungry and I really wanted that pear. But every time I tried to get it, someone passed by and looked at me. I quickly turned in the other direction and waited for the person to pass by. I tried again and again to get that pear, but the same thing happened. I was desperate. I decided to get the pear and not to worry about the people who saw me. At that moment, a gentleman opened a window behind me and said,
"Come in here, please."
A well-dressed servant opened the door. He took me to a beautiful room. Here, two old gentlemen were sitting and discussing something important. Their breakfast was on the table. I was very hungry and I stared at their breakfast. I want to tell the reader that the two gentlemen had made a bet several days before. I knew nothing about the bet until later. Let me tell you what happened. Chapter 2. An unusual bet. The two old gentlemen were brothers. For several days, they argued about a very strange subject. They decided to end their argument with a bet, as the English usually do. The following was the subject of the bet. The Bank of England issued two banknotes of $1 million each for a public transaction with a foreign country. England used one banknote and the other remained in the bank. At this point, Brother A said to Brother B,
"If an honest and intelligent stranger arrives in London without a friend and without money, except for the $1 million banknote, he will starve to death."
Brother B answered.
"No, I don't agree."
Brother A said.
"If he goes to the bank or anywhere else to change this big note, the police will put him in prison. Everyone will think he stole it."
They continued arguing for days until Brother B said,
"I'll bet $20,000 that the stranger will live for 30 days with the banknote and not go to prison."
Brother A accepted the bet. He went to the bank and bought the $1 million banknote. After, he returned home and prepared a letter. Then the two brothers sat by the window and waited for the right man for the bet. They saw a lot of honest faces go by, but they were not intelligent enough. Several faces were intelligent, but they were not honest. A lot of faces were honest and intelligent, but they were not poor enough. Other faces were honest, intelligent, and poor, but they were not strangers. When they saw me from the window, they thought I was the right man. They asked me questions, and soon they knew my story. Finally, they told me I was the right man for the bet. I asked them to explain the bet. One of the gentlemen gave me an envelope. I wanted to open it, but he said,
No, don't open it now. Wait until you are in your hotel room. Then read it very carefully.
I was confused and I wanted to discuss the subject with them. But they didn't. I felt hurt because I was the subject of a joke. When I left their house, I looked for the pair on the street. It was gone. I was quite angry with those two gentlemen. Far from their house, I opened the envelope. I saw that there was money inside. I didn't stop to read their letter. I ran to the nearest eating place. I ate and ate and ate. At last, I took out the envelope with the money to pay for my meal. I looked at the banknote and almost fainted. It was a banknote worth $5 million. I was speechless. I stared at the banknote. The two gentlemen had made a big mistake. They probably wanted to give me a $1 banknote. I saw the owner of the eating place staring at the banknote too. We were both surprised. I did not know what to do or say. So I simply gave him the note and said,
Give me the change, please.
The owner apologized 1,000 times.
I'm very sorry, but I can't change this banknote, sir.
I don't have any other money. Please change this note.
The owner then said,
You can pay for this food whenever you want, sir. I understand that you are a very rich gentleman. You like playing jokes on people by dressing like a poor man. You can come here and eat all you want, whenever you want. You can pay me when you want.
Chapter 3, The Letter. When I arrived, the same servant opened the door. I asked for the two gentlemen.
They are gone.
The servant said,
Gone? Gone where?
Oh, on a journey.
But where did they go?
To the continent, I think.
The continent?
There were no signature, no address, no date on the letter. How strange! I didn't know what to think. I went to a park, sat down, and thought about what to do. After an hour, I reached the decision that follows. The two old gentlemen are playing a game that I don't understand. They are betting on me. But at that time, I didn't know anything about the details of the bet. If I go to the Bank of England to return the banknote, the bank will ask me lots of questions. If I tell the truth, no one will believe me. They will put me in an asylum. If I tell a lie, the police will put me in prison. I can't even give it to anyone, because no honest person will want it. I can do only one thing. I must keep the bill for a whole month. And I must not lose it. If I help the old man to win his bet, he will give me the job I want. The idea of an important job with a big salary made me happy. With this exciting idea in mind, I began walking down the streets of London. Chapter 4, At the Tailor's. Every time I passed in front of a tailor's, I wanted to enter and buy some new clothes. But I had no money to pay for them. The $1 million banknote in my pocket was useless. I passed in front of the same tailor's 6 times. At last I entered. I quietly asked if they had an old, unattractive suit that no one wanted to buy. The man I spoke to nodded his head, but he didn't speak. Then another man looked at me and nodded his head. I went to him and he said,
"One moment, please."
After some time, he took me to a back room. He looked at several ugly suits that no one wanted. He chose the worst for me. I really wanted a suit, so I said nothing. It was time to pay.
Can you wait a few days for the money? I haven't got any small change with me.
The man said,
"Oh, you haven't? Well, I thought gentlemen like you carried large change."
My friend,
I replied.
you can't judge a stranger by the clothes he wears. I can pay for this suit. But can you change a large banknote?
"Oh, of course we can change a large banknote."
He said coldly. I gave him the banknote. He received it with a smile, a big smile that covered his face. When he read the banknote, his smile disappeared. The owner of the shop came over and asked me,
"What's the trouble?"
There isn't any trouble. I'm waiting for my change.
Come, come. Give him his change, Todd. Quickly.
Todd answered.
It's easy to say, but look at the banknote.
The owner looked at the banknote. Then he looked at my package with the ugly suit.
Todd,
He shouted.
you are stupid. How can you sell this unattractive suit to a millionaire? Todd, you can't see the difference between a millionaire and a poor man.
I apologize, sir.
The owner continued.
Please take off those things you are wearing and throw them in the fire. Put on this fine shirt and this handsome suit. It's perfect for you, simple but elegant.
I told him I was very happy with the new suit.
Oh, wait until you see what we can make for you in your size.
Todd, bring a pen and a book. Let me measure your leg, your arm. Todd, bring a pen and a book. Let me measure your leg, your arm. I didn't have a moment to speak. The owner measured me. Then he ordered his tailors to make me morning suits, evening suits, shirts, coats, and other things.
But, my dear sir,
I said,
I can order all these things only if you change my banknote. Or, if you can wait a while before I pay you.
Wait a while. I'll wait forever. That's the word. Todd, send these things to the gentleman's address. Let the less important customers wait.
What's your address, sir?
I'm changing my home. I'll come back and give you my new address. I replied.
Quite right, sir, quite right. Let me show you to the door, sir. Good day, sir, good day.
Chapter 5, The Poor Millionaire. The impossible happened. I bought everything I wanted without money. I showed my banknote and asked for change, but every time the same thing happened. No one was able to change it. I bought all that I needed and all the luxuries that I wanted. I stayed at an expensive hotel in Hanover Square. I always had dinner at the hotel. But I preferred having breakfast at Harris's simple eating place. Harris's was the first place where I had a good meal with my $1 million note. That's where it all started. The news about me and my banknote was all over London. Harris's eating place became famous because I had breakfast there. Harris was happy with all his new customers. I lived like a rich, important man. I had money to spend. I lived in a dream. But often I said to myself,
Remember, this dream will end when the two men return to London. Everything will change.
my story was in the newspapers. Everyone talked about the strange millionaire with the $1 million note in his pocket. Punch magazine drew a funny picture of me on the front page. People talked about everything I did and about everything I said. They followed me in the streets. I kept my old clothes and sometimes I wore them. It was fun when the shop owners thought I was poor. Then I showed them the banknote, and oh, how their faces changed. After 10 days in London, I went to visit the American ambassador. He was very happy to meet me. He invited me to a dinner party that evening. He told me that he knew my father from Yale University. He invited me to visit his home whenever I wanted. I was glad to have a new, important friend. I thought to myself, I'll need an important friend when the story of the $1 million note and bet comes out. I want the reader to know that I plan to pay back all the shop owners who sold me things on credit.
If I win the bet for the old gentleman,
I thought,
I will have an important job. With an important job, I will have a big salary.
I plan to pay back everyone with my first year's salary. Chapter 6: The Dinner Party. There were 14 people at the dinner party. The Duke and Duchess of Shoreditch, and their daughter Lady Anne Grace Eleanor de Bowen, the Earl and Countess of Newgate, Viscount Cheapside, Lord and Lady Blatherskite, the ambassador and his wife and daughter, and some other people. There was also a beautiful 22-year-old English girl named Portia Langham. I fell in love with her in 2 minutes, and she with me. After a while, the house servant presented another guest, Mr. Lloyd Hastings. When Mr. Hastings saw me, he said,
I think I know you.
Yes, you probably do.
Are you the?
Yes, I'm the strange millionaire with the $1 million note in his pocket.
Well, this is a surprise. I never thought you were the same Henry Adams from San Francisco. 6 months ago, you were working in the offices of Blake Hopkins in San Francisco. I remember clearly. You had a very small salary. And, at night, you helped me arrange the papers for the Gould and Curry Mining Company. Now you're a millionaire, a celebrity here in London. I can't believe it. How exciting.
I can't believe it either, Lloyd.
Just 3 months ago, we went to the Miners' Restaurant.
No, it was the What Cheer restaurant.
Right, it was the What Cheer. We went there at 2 o'clock in the morning. We had steak and coffee. That night we worked for 6 long hours on the Gould and Curry Mining Company papers. Do you remember, Henry, I asked you to come to London with me. I wanted you to help me sell the Gould and Curry gold mine shares. But you refused.
Of course I remember. I didn't want to leave my job in San Francisco. And I still think it's difficult to sell shares of a California gold mine here in London.
You were right, Henry. You were so right. It is impossible to sell these shares here in London. My plan failed and I spent all my money. I don't want to talk about it.
But you must talk about it. When we leave the dinner party, you must tell me what happened.
Oh, can I? I really need to talk to a friend.
Lloyd said, with water in his eyes.
Yes, I want to hear the whole story, every word of it.
Thank you, Henry. You're a true friend.
At this point, it was time for dinner. Thanks to the English system of precedence, there was no dinner. The Duke of Shoreditch wanted to sit at the head of the table. The American ambassador also wanted to sit at the head of the table. It was impossible for them to decide, so we had no dinner. The English know about the system of precedence. They have dinner before going out to dinner. But strangers know nothing about it. They remain hungry all evening. Instead, we had a dish of sardines and a strawberry. Now it was time for everyone to play a game called cribbage. The English never play a game for fun. They play to win or to lose something. Miss Langham and I played the game, but with little interest. I looked at her beautiful face and said,
Miss Langham, I love you.
Mr. Adams,
she said softly and smiled.
I love you too.
This was a wonderful evening. Miss Langham and I were very happy. We smiled, laughed, and talked. I was honest with her. I told her that I was poor and that I didn't have a cent in the world. I explained that the $1 million note was not mine. She was very curious to know more. I told her the whole story from the start. She laughed and laughed. She thought the story was very funny. I didn't understand why it was funny. I also explained that I needed an important job with a big salary to pay all my debts.
Portia, dear, can you come with me on the day I must meet those two gentlemen?
Well, yes, if I can help you.
She replied.
Of course you can help me. You are so lovely that when the two gentlemen see you, I can ask for any job and any salary. With you there, my sweet Portia, the two gentlemen won't refuse me anything.
Chapter 7, A $1 million Idea. At the end of the dinner party, I returned to the hotel with Hastings. He talked about his problems, but I didn't listen to him. I was thinking about Portia the whole time. When we arrived at the hotel, Hastings said,
Let me just stand here and look at this marvelous hotel. It's a palace. What expensive furniture. You have everything you want. You are rich, Henry. And I am poor?
His words scared me. I too was poor. I didn't have a cent in the world, and I had debts to pay. I needed to win the gentleman's bet. This was my last hope. Hastings didn't know the truth.
Henry, just a tiny part of your income can save me. I'm desperate.
Hastings cried.
My dear Hastings, sit down here and drink this hot whiskey. Now tell me your whole story, every word of it.
Do you want to hear my story again?
But, you never told me your story.
Of course I told you my story as we walked to the hotel. Don't you remember?
I didn't hear one word of it.
Henry, are you ill? Is something wrong with you? What did you drink at the dinner party?
Oh, Hastings, I'm in love. I can only think about my sweet Portia. This is why I didn't hear your story before.
Hastings got up from his chair, shook my hand, and laughed.
I'm very happy for you, Henry, very happy.
he said, smiling.
I'll tell you the whole story again.
So he sat down and patiently started to tell me his story. To make a long story short, the owners of the Gould and Curry gold mine sent Lloyd to England to sell the shares of the mine for $1 million. Any money he received over $1 million was his to keep. Hastings's dream was to sell the shares for more than $1 million and become rich. He had only 1 month to sell the shares. He had done everything to sell them, but nobody wanted to buy them. Then he jumped up and cried,
Henry, you can help me. Will you do it?
Tell me how.
Give me $1 million and I'll sell you all the shares. You will be the new owner of the gold mine. Don't refuse.
I did not know what to say. I wanted to tell Hastings the truth. But then an intelligent idea came to me. I thought about it for a moment and then calmly said,
I will save you, Lloyd.
Then I am already saved. How can I thank you?
Let me finish, Lloyd. I will save you, but not in that way. I have a better way. I know everything about that mine. I know its great value. You will sell the shares by using my name. You can send anyone to me, since people in London know me. I will guarantee the gold mine. In a week or two, you will sell the shares for $3 million by using my name. And we'll share the money you earn. Half to you and half to me.
Lloyd was very happy and excited. He danced around the room and laughed.
I can use your name. Your name, think of it. The rich Londoners will run to buy these shares. I'm saved. And I'll never forget you, Henry.
Chapter 8. Back to Portland Place. The next day, all of London talked about the shares of the California gold mine. I stayed in my hotel and said to everyone who came to me,
Yes, I know Mr. Hastings. He's a very honest man. And I know the gold mine because I lived in the California gold country. It is a mine of great value.
people were now interested in buying the shares. I spent every evening with Portia at the American ambassador's house. I didn't tell her about the shares and the mine. It was a surprise. We talked about our love and our future together. Finally, the end of the month arrived. Lots of rich Londoners bought the shares of the mine. I had $1 million of my own in the London and County Bank. And Lloyd did too. It was time to meet with the two old gentlemen. I dressed in my best clothes and I went to get Portia. Before going to Portland Place, Portia and I talked about the job and the salary.
Portia, you are so beautiful. When the two gentlemen meet you, they will give me any job and any salary I ask for.
Henry, please remember that if we ask for too much, we will get nothing. Then what will happen to us?
Don't be afraid, Portia.
When we arrived, the same servant opened the door. There were the two old gentlemen having tea. They were surprised to see Portia. I introduced her to them. Then I said,
Gentlemen, I am ready to report to you.
We are pleased to hear this.
said one gentleman.
Now we can decide the bet that my brother Abel and I made. If you won for me, you can have any job in my power. Do you have the $1 million note?
Here it is, sir.
And I gave it to him.
I won.
He shouted.
Now what do you say, Abel?
I say he survived, and I lost $20,000. I can't believe it.
I have more to tell you,
I said.
but it's a long story. I'll tell you another time. For now, look at this.
What? A certificate of deposit for $200,000. Is it yours?
It's mine. I earned it by using the banknote you lent me for a month.
This is astonishing. I can't believe it.
Portia looked at me with surprise and said,
Henry, is that really your money? You didn't tell me the truth.
No, I didn't. But I know you'll forgive me.
Don't be so sure. You told me a lie, Henry.
Dearest Portia, it was only for fun. Come, let's go now.
But wait.
my gentleman said.
I want to give you the job and the salary you choose.
Thank you with all my heart. But I don't want the job.
Henry, you didn't thank the good gentleman in the right way. Can I do it for you?
Portia said.
Of course you can, my dear.
Portia walked to my gentleman, sat on his lap and kissed him on the mouth. Then the two old gentlemen shouted and laughed. I was amazed. What was happening?
Papa,
Said Portia.
Henry doesn't want your job. I feel very hurt.
Darling, is that your father?
I asked.
Yes, he's my stepfather, a dear man. Now do you understand why I laughed when you told me your story?
My dearest sir,
I said.
I want to take back what I said. There is a job that I want.
Tell me.
I want the job of son-in-law.
Well. But you were never a son-in-law before. Do you know how to do this job?
Try me, please. Try me for 30 or 40 years, and if...
Oh, all right. Take her.
We're Portia and I happy. There aren't enough words in the dictionary to describe our happiness. When the Londoners heard the whole story of my adventures with the banknote, they talked of nothing else. Portia's father took the banknote back to the Bank of England and cashed it. Then he gave us the cancelled banknote as a wedding present. We put it in a picture frame and hung it on the wall in our new home. And so I always say,
Yes, it's $1 million banknote, but it only bought one thing in its life. The most valuable thing in the world, Portia.
Chapter 1. Shadows of the Past. Once upon a time, in a gloomy little town shrouded in mystery, there stood a quaint old bookshop. Its creaky wooden sign swayed gently in the chilly wind, announcing, Victor's Book Emporium. To any curious passerby, the narrow cobblestone streets, dimly lit by flickering gas lamps, cast eerie shadows on the damp walls of the surrounding buildings, adding to the town's enigmatic charm. In this peculiar town lived Victor, the middle-aged owner of the bookshop. He was known for his extensive collection of rare and unusual books, which attracted scholars and bibliophiles from far and wide. However, as of late, the townspeople couldn't help but notice a change in Victor's demeanor. Once a kind and gentle soul, he had become increasingly irritable and withdrawn. Rumors swirled around the town about the cause of his transformation, but no one knew the real reason behind it. One foggy evening, as Victor was closing up the bookshop, his old friend Thomas stopped by to check on him.
Victor, my friend.
Thomas said with a concerned frown.
I've noticed you've been acting rather strange lately. Is everything all right?
Victor sighed, avoiding eye contact.
I appreciate your concern, Thomas, but I'm fine. I just have a lot on my mind, that's all.
Thomas hesitated, sensing there was more to the story.
You know, Victor, back in the day, you used to be the kindest person I knew. You'd always lend a helping hand to anyone in need, and you were especially fond of animals. Remember Midnight, your beloved black cat? Whatever happened to him?
At the mention of Midnight, Victor's eyes grew wide, and his hands trembled ever so slightly.
That's a painful memory, Thomas.
He whispered, swallowing hard.
Let's not talk about it.
As Victor turned away, a gust of wind blew through the street, carrying a soft, ghostly meow that seemed to echo in the night. Both men shuddered, but neither of them could pinpoint where the sound had come from. Unbeknownst to them, the shadows of the past were about to come alive, setting the stage for a chilling tale of guilt, redemption, and the haunting power of a cat's vengeful spirit. And so, the story of the phantom feline began. Chapter 2. The Phantom Feline. The days that followed were filled with an unshakable sense of unease. Victor couldn't help but feel as if he were being watched, and every shadow seemed to hide an unseen presence. One stormy afternoon, as he was returning from a visit to the market, Victor stumbled upon a small, shivering black cat huddled in an alleyway. The sight of the cat sent a chill down his spine, for it bore a striking resemblance to Midnight, his long-lost pet. As Victor approached the cat, it gazed at him with piercing yellow eyes, never blinking, never looking away. Victor felt a pang of guilt in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He hesitated for a moment before deciding to bring the cat back to his bookshop, providing it with shelter from the storm. Little did he know that he had just invited the phantom feline into his life. From that day on, the black cat never left Victor's side. It followed him around the bookshop, always lurking in the corners of his vision. Victor found himself growing more and more unnerved by its presence, unable to shake the feeling that the cat knew his darkest secrets. Each day, the phantom feline seemed to grow bolder, its ghostly meows echoing through the empty halls of the bookshop, taunting Victor with memories of his past. As Victor's encounters with the cat became increasingly distressing, the townspeople took notice of his erratic behavior. Whispers began to spread, and some started to question Victor's sanity. In the local tavern, Thomas and his friend, Martha, discussed their concerns.
Have you seen Victor lately, Thomas?
Martha asked, her voice tinged with worry.
He's been acting so strange, always muttering to himself and looking over his shoulder. And what's with that black cat that's always with him?
Thomas shook his head, his brow furrowed.
I don't know, Martha. It's like he's being hunted by something, or someone. That cat. It's almost as if it's a ghost, sent to torment him.
As the townspeople whispered and speculated, Victor's desperation grew. He knew he had to rid himself of the ghostly cat, but how? With each passing day, the phantom feline tightened its grip on Victor's conscience, pulling him deeper into the shadows of his own guilt. And in those shadows, the whispers in the dark grew louder, revealing the true extent of Victor's past actions and the reasons behind his cruelty. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Dark. As Victor's torment continued, the townspeople grew increasingly concerned. One evening, a small group of them gathered in the dimly lit corner of the local tavern, determined to uncover the truth behind Victor's odd behavior. Among them were Thomas, Martha, and an elderly woman named Edna, who had known Victor since he was a child.
Victor used to be such a kind and gentle soul.
Edna began, her voice quivering with emotion.
He'd always help anyone in need, and he had a special love for animals. I remember when he adopted Midnight, his old black cat, and how much he cared for her. But something changed in him after she passed away. It's as if his heart turned cold.
Thomas chimed in, recalling a rumor he had heard.
I heard that Victor did something terrible to another animal after midnight died. Some say it was out of grief, others believe it was an act of cruelty. Whatever it was, it seems to have haunted him ever since.
The others nodded solemnly, understanding that Victor's recent actions were a result of the guilt that weighed heavily on his conscience. As they continued to discuss his strange behavior, Victor himself was pacing the floor of his bookshop, wringing his hands and muttering under his breath.
I can't take it anymore,
he whispered to himself, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape from the ghostly cat.
This phantom feline is driving me mad. I must find a way to be rid of it once and for all.
Victor's desperation was mounting, and he knew he needed to confide in someone. Late one night, he sought out Edna, the only person in town who still seemed to care for him. Trembling, he spilled his darkest secrets, revealing the cruelty he had committed and the guilt that had consumed him ever since. Edna listened with a mixture of sadness and shock.
Victor, my dear boy,
she said softly,
you must confront your past and accept the consequences of your actions. Only then can you find redemption and be free from this haunting.
With Edna's wise words echoing in his mind, Victor made a decision. It was time to face the phantom feline and confront the specter of his past. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and heartache, but he could no longer hide from the whispers in the dark. Chapter 4. Confronting the specter. Victor's heart pounded in his chest as he prepared himself to confront the ghostly cat. With a newfound determination, he set out into the night, following the shadowy figure that seemed to be taunting him from the corner of his eye. As he walked through the dark, narrow streets of the gloomy town, the wind howled around him, heightening his sense of unease.
Show yourself,
Victor shouted into the darkness, trying to mask the fear in his voice.
I am ready to face you and my past.
The black cat appeared before him, its eyes glinting like embers in the night. It beckoned him with a flick of its tail, leading him on a harrowing journey through the town. Victor followed the cat through a series of increasingly eerie and unsettling locations, an abandoned house with creaking floorboards, a graveyard shrouded in fog, and a derelict church where the wind whistled through the broken windows, creating an otherworldly melody. At each stop, the cat forced Victor to confront his guilt, presenting him with vivid reminders of his past actions. Victor saw a vision of himself hurting the animal that had triggered his descent into darkness, and he felt the weight of his guilt bearing down on him like a suffocating blanket. As they reached the final stop on their journey, the very spot where Victor had buried Midnight, the ghostly cat stopped and stared at him, its eyes burning into his soul. Victor could no longer hold back the tears.
I'm so sorry,
he sobbed, falling to his knees.
I know what I did was wrong, and I can't change the past. But I beg you, please, forgive me. Let me make amends.
The cat studied him for a moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his words. Then, with a flick of its tail, it vanished into the darkness. Victor felt a great weight lifted from his shoulders, and he knew that he had been granted a chance at redemption. As he walked back through the town, the eerie atmosphere seemed to dissipate, as if the specter of his guilt had been exorcised. Victor was filled with hope, determined to face the consequences of his actions and make amends for his past cruelty. Chapter 5. The Road to Redemption. Victor woke up the next morning, feeling lighter and more determined than ever to make amends for his past cruelty. He started by cleaning up his bookshop, sweeping away the dust and cobwebs that had accumulated during his descent into darkness. As he worked, he could feel the energy in the shop shifting, becoming warmer and more inviting. Victor then reached out to the townspeople, making a conscious effort to reconnect with them. He offered to help repair the broken fence at Mrs. Brown's house and volunteered at the local soup kitchen, serving meals to those in need. At first, the townspeople were wary of his sudden change, but as they saw Victor's genuine efforts, they slowly started to accept him again. One day, as Victor was organizing books in his shop, a young girl named Emily timidly approached him. She had heard from her friends that the once cruel bookshop owner was turning over a new leaf and had decided to see for herself.
Excuse me, Mr. Victor?
Emily asked hesitantly.
I was wondering if you had any books about cats. My family just adopted a kitten, and I'd like to learn how to take care of her.
Victor smiled warmly and led Emily to a shelf filled with books on animals. As they browsed the titles together, he found himself sharing stories of his beloved Midnight with the young girl, his heart swelling with a renewed sense of purpose. In the weeks that followed, Victor continued to work on rebuilding his relationships with the townspeople and making amends for his past actions. He started a book club at his shop, creating a space where people could come together, share their love of reading, and learn from one another. His once dreary bookshop became a lively hub of community activity, as people of all ages gathered to exchange ideas and stories. As Victor stood in the doorway of his bustling shop one day, he realized that he had found inner peace and a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life. The ghostly cat had been a catalyst for change, forcing him to confront his guilt and seek redemption. Now, free from the torment of his past, Victor was ready to embrace the future and continue on the road to redemption. The townspeople, witnessing Victor's transformation, were reminded of the power of forgiveness and the importance of compassion. Slowly, the gloomy atmosphere that had once shrouded the town began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope and renewal. Victor's journey to redemption had not only transformed his life but also inspired those around him to believe in the power of change and the possibility of a brighter future. Epilogue: A New Dawn. Months had passed since Victor's redemption, and the once gloomy town had transformed into a place full of warmth and hope. Victor's bookshop continued to be a bustling hub of activity, where townspeople gathered to share their love of reading and form lasting friendships. One sunny afternoon, Emily, the young girl who had helped Victor on his journey, was sitting in the bookshop with her friends discussing their latest book club pick.
Victor's story is amazing, isn't it?
Emily said to her friends.
Who would have thought that a ghostly cat could bring about such a change in him and the whole town?
Her friend, Jacob, nodded.
It just goes to show everyone deserves a second chance, and sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you.
As the children continued their discussion, Victor watched them from behind the counter, his heart filled with gratitude. He knew that his transformation had not only changed his life but also had a lasting impact on the town and its inhabitants. The spirit of kindness and forgiveness had spread throughout the community, inspiring others to confront their own guilt and seek redemption. One day, as Victor was watering the flowers outside his shop, Mrs. Brown, the elderly neighbor he had helped earlier, approached him.
Victor,
she said with a gentle smile.
I just wanted to thank you for all you've done for our town. You've brought us together, and your bookshop has become a place where we can learn, grow, and find solace.
Victor smiled back at her, touched by her words.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. It was the support of people like you who helped me find my way. We've all played a part in making this town a better place.
As the sun set on the town, casting a warm glow on the streets and buildings, Victor stood in the doorway of his bookshop, reflecting on his journey. He knew that he could never undo the mistakes of his past, but he had found redemption and purpose in his new life. And as the townspeople continued to heal and grow, they too were reminded of the power of hope, the importance of forgiveness, and the possibility of a brighter future. Together, they had created a new dawn for themselves and the generations to come.
Chapter 1. In the beginning. Long before Europeans arrived, diverse indigenous peoples lived across North America for thousands of years. There were many different tribes, each with its own unique culture, language, and way of life. Some of the first inhabitants crossed a land bridge called Bering from Asia into present-day Alaska around 15,000 to 30,000 years ago. Over time, these early people spread out and settled throughout the continent, adapting to various environments and forming complex societies. In the southwest, the ancestral Pueblones built impressive cliff dwellings and developed advanced irrigation systems for farming. The Hohokam and the Mogollon were also skilled farmers and pottery makers in this region. The Mississippian culture, centered around the Mississippi River and its tributaries, built large earthen mounds for ceremonial and burial purposes. Their largest city, Cahokia, was home to around 10,000 to 20,000 people at its peak around 1100 AD. In the eastern woodlands, tribes like the Iroquois and the Algonquians lived in villages and practiced a mix of hunting, fishing, and farming. The Iroquois Confederacy, a political alliance of 5, later 6, tribes, played a significant role in the region's history. On the Great Plains, tribes like the Sioux, Comanche, and Cheyenne relied on the buffalo for food, clothing, and shelter. They were skilled hunters and horse riders and lived in teepees, which were easy to set up and take down. In the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Tlingit, Haida, and Quequital thrived in the region's abundant natural resources. They built large, intricately carved wooden houses and totem poles, and were skilled fishermen, hunters, and gatherers. These indigenous peoples shaped the early history of the continent, and their cultures, languages, and traditions continue to influence modern America. As we move on to the next chapter, we'll see how the arrival of the Pilgrims and other European settlers would forever change the lives of these indigenous peoples and the land they called home.
Chapter 2. The Pilgrim Fathers. In the early 17th century, a group of English religious separatists known as the Pilgrims decided to leave their homeland in search of religious freedom. They had faced persecution for their beliefs in England and wanted to establish a community where they could practice their religion without interference. In September 1620, around 100 pilgrims, including men, women, and children, boarded the Mayflower, a small ship that would carry them across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World. The journey was long and difficult, with rough seas and cramped living conditions. After more than 2 months at sea, they finally sighted land on November 9, 1620. The Pilgrims originally planned to settle near the mouth of the Hudson River, in present-day New York, but they were blown off course and arrived in Cape Cod, in present-day Massachusetts. After exploring the area, they decided to establish their settlement at a place they named Plymouth. The first winter in Plymouth was harsh, with many pilgrims suffering from cold, hunger, and illness. Nearly half of the settlers died during that first winter. However, the survivors were determined to build a life in their new home. In the spring, they began planting crops and constructing houses. The Pilgrims were not the first Europeans to arrive in North America, nor were they the first to interact with the indigenous peoples who lived there. The Native Americans had already encountered European explorers and fishermen in the past. However, the Pilgrims' arrival marked a significant change in the relationship between the indigenous peoples and the newcomers. The Wampanoag tribe, led by Chief Massasoit, played a crucial role in the survival of the Pilgrims. They taught the settlers how to grow native crops like corn, beans, and squash, as well as how to fish and hunt local wildlife. In the fall of 1621, the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag came together to celebrate a successful harvest in a feast that is now considered the first Thanksgiving. Despite the cooperation between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag, tensions arose as more English settlers arrived and expanded their settlements. As we move on to the next chapter, we'll learn how these tensions contributed to the War of Independence and the formation of the United States.
Chapter 3. The War of Independence. As more and more English settlers arrived in North America, tensions between the British government and the 13 colonies grew. One of the main causes of these tensions was the issue of taxation. After the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, Britain faced a large national debt and sought to raise funds by taxing its American colonies. In 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, which required colonists to pay a tax on various printed materials, such as newspapers, legal documents, and playing cards. Many colonists were outraged by this new tax, as they believed it was unfair for the British government to tax them without their consent. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," became a rallying cry for the colonists, who began to protest and boycott British goods. The British government eventually repealed the Stamp Act in 1766, but tensions continued to rise as new taxes were imposed, such as the Townshend Acts in 1767. In response to these taxes, the colonists organized more boycotts and protests, culminating in the Boston Tea Party in 1773. This act of defiance saw a group of colonists, disguised as Native Americans, dump 342 chests of British tea into Boston Harbor. In retaliation, the British government passed the Intolerable Acts in 1774, which aimed to punish the people of Massachusetts for their defiance. This only served to further unite the colonists against British rule. In September 1774, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress, where they demanded the repeal of the Intolerable Acts and called for a boycott of British goods. The situation escalated in April 1775, when British troops and American colonists clashed in the battles of Lexington and Concord. These skirmishes marked the beginning of the American Revolution, a war for independence that would last until 1783. The colonies formed the Continental Army, led by General George Washington, to fight against the British forces. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, which formally announced the colonies' intention to break away from British rule. The Revolutionary War was a difficult struggle for the American colonies, as they faced a powerful enemy with a well-trained and well-equipped army. However, the colonists were determined and resourceful, and they received support from other nations, most notably France. The war reached a turning point in 1781, when the British Army, led by General Charles Cornwallis, was defeated at the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia. This victory convinced the British government to begin peace negotiations with the American colonies. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially recognizing the United States as an independent nation and establishing its borders. With independence secured, the newly formed United States faced the challenge of creating a stable and effective system of government. As we continue to the next chapter, we'll explore the Civil War, a conflict that would threaten the unity and future of the young nation.
Chapter 4. The Civil War. The issue of slavery had been a contentious topic in the United States since its founding. Tensions between the northern states, where slavery was largely opposed, and the southern states, whose economies relied heavily on slave labor, grew over the years. The situation was further exacerbated by disputes over whether new territories and states should be allowed to practice slavery. In the 1850s, a series of events fueled the division between the North and the South. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required Northern citizens to assist in the capture and return of runaway slaves, angering many Northerners. The 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed the people of these territories to decide for themselves whether to permit slavery, leading to violent clashes between pro- and anti-slavery settlers. The election of Abraham Lincoln as the 16th President of the United States in 1860 proved to be the tipping point. Lincoln, a member of the newly formed Republican Party, opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. In response to his election, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America, led by President Jefferson Davis. The Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Union, comprising the northern states, was determined to preserve the United States and abolish slavery. The Confederacy, made up of the southern states, sought to maintain its independence and protect its way of life, which included the institution of slavery. The early years of the war were difficult for the Union, as the Confederacy won several key battles. However, the Union's larger population, industrial strength, and superior resources eventually began to turn the tide of the war in its favor. In 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory were to be set free. As the war progressed, the Union achieved several important victories, including the battles of Gettysburg and Vicksburg in 1863. These battles weakened the Confederate Army and helped to shift the momentum of the war. In 1864, General Ulysses S. Grant was appointed commander of all Union armies and launched a series of campaigns that would ultimately lead to the Confederacy's defeat. The Civil War officially ended on April 9, 1865, when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The war resulted in the deaths of more than 600,000 soldiers and civilians, making it the deadliest conflict in U.S. history. The Union's victory led to the abolition of slavery, with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution formally outlawing the practice in 1865. Following the war, the United States entered a period of reconstruction, as the nation struggled to heal its wounds and rebuild its devastated southern states. The legacy of the Civil War and the end of slavery would shape the nation for decades to come, as we'll see in the following chapters.
Chapter 5. The Wild West. Following the Civil War, the United States entered a period of rapid westward expansion, often referred to as the Wild West. This era, which lasted from the late 19th to the early 20th century, was marked by the settlement of vast territories, conflicts with Native Americans, and the growth of the cattle and mining industries. The Homestead Act of 1862 played a crucial role in encouraging westward expansion. This law provided 160 acres of public land to settlers for a small fee as long as they built a dwelling and cultivated the land for at least 5 years. Thousands of people, including former slaves, immigrants, and veterans, took advantage of this opportunity to claim their own piece of land. The construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, also facilitated westward migration. The railroad connected the eastern and western coasts of the United States, making travel and trade between the two regions much easier. The availability of jobs in railroad construction attracted many immigrants, particularly from China and Ireland. As settlers moved west, they often came into conflict with Native American tribes who had lived on the land for generations. The U.S. government frequently signed treaties with these tribes, promising them land and resources in exchange for peace. However, many of these treaties were broken, leading to violence and forced relocation of Native Americans onto reservations. The cattle industry thrived during the Wild West era. Cowboys herded cattle from Texas to railheads in Kansas, where the cattle would be transported by train to markets in the East. This practice, known as the cattle drive, became a central aspect of cowboy culture and the image of the rugged, independent cowboy became an iconic symbol of the American West. Mining also played a significant role in the development of the Wild West. Gold and silver rushes in states such as California, Colorado, and Nevada attracted thousands of prospectors who hoped to strike it rich. Boomtowns sprang up around these mining operations, some of which eventually grew into major cities such as Denver and San Francisco. The Wild West era has been mythologized in American culture through stories, movies, and television shows that often romanticize the adventures of cowboys, outlaws, and lawmen. While many of these tales are exaggerated or fictionalized, they have helped to shape our understanding of this important period in American history. As the Wild West era came to a close, the United States continued to evolve, with ongoing struggles for civil rights and the integration of new immigrants into American society. In the chapters that follow, we will explore the diverse experiences of Native Americans, African Americans, and immigrants, as well as the development of American government, culture, and daily life.
Chapter 6. Native Americans. Long before Europeans arrived in the Americas, indigenous peoples had inhabited the land for thousands of years. With diverse cultures, languages, and ways of life, these native peoples developed complex societies that still influence modern America. Their history has been marked by displacement, violence, and discrimination, as well as efforts to preserve and revitalize their cultures. Native American societies varied greatly across North America, with distinct tribes and cultural groups forming in different regions. In the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Haida and Tlingit relied on the abundant resources of the sea and forests, developing sophisticated woodworking and carving techniques. In the Great Plains, tribes such as the Sioux and Cheyenne were nomadic, hunting buffalo and adapting to life on the vast grasslands. The Pueblo peoples of the Southwest built impressive adobe structures and cultivated crops like corn, beans, and squash. When European settlers arrived, they introduced new diseases, weapons, and technologies that significantly impacted Native American societies. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza spread rapidly, decimating native populations who had no immunity to these illnesses. Conflicts between Europeans and Native Americans often arose due to competition for land and resources. Throughout the years, the U.S. government negotiated numerous treaties with Native American tribes, promising land, resources, and protection. Unfortunately, many of these treaties were broken, leading to further violence and displacement. The forced relocation of tribes, such as the Cherokee during the Trail of Tears, remains a dark and painful chapter in American history. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw a series of policies designed to assimilate Native Americans into mainstream American society. Boarding schools were established to teach Native children English and European customs, often at the expense of their own language and traditions. The Dawes Act of 1887 sought to divide tribal lands into individual allotments, further disrupting traditional ways of life. Despite these challenges, Native Americans have persevered and worked to preserve their cultures and traditions. The 20th century saw a resurgence of cultural pride and activism, with events like the occupation of Alcatraz Island and the founding of the American Indian Movement. Today, many tribes operate their own governments, schools, and cultural institutions, working to protect their heritage and promote understanding of their history. As we continue our journey through American history, we will explore the stories of immigrants who arrived from all over the world, seeking new opportunities and shaping the nation's economic, social, and cultural development.
Chapter 7. New Americans. Throughout its history, the United States has been a nation of immigrants, with waves of people arriving from all over the world. These immigrants have contributed significantly to the nation's economic, social, and cultural development, helping to shape the diverse and dynamic country we know today. The first significant wave of immigration occurred in the early 19th century, when millions of Europeans, particularly from Ireland and Germany, came to the United States in search of better opportunities. The Irish, fleeing the Great Famine, often settled in urban areas like New York City and Boston, while Germans established farming communities in the Midwest. These immigrants brought their languages, customs, and culinary traditions with them, enriching American culture. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw even larger waves of immigration, with people arriving from countries like Italy, Poland, Russia, and Greece. Many of these immigrants settled in major cities, creating vibrant ethnic neighborhoods such as New York City's Little Italy and Chicago's Greektown. The influx of workers also fueled the growth of American industry, with immigrants toiling in factories, mines, and railroads. During this time, Asian immigrants began to arrive in significant numbers as well. Chinese laborers, for instance, played a crucial role in building the Transcontinental Railroad, while Japanese immigrants settled in California to work in agriculture. However, these immigrants faced discrimination and restrictive immigration laws, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The early 20th century also saw a rise in immigration from Latin America, particularly from Mexico. Mexican immigrants have made significant contributions to American agriculture and industry. And their cultural influence can be seen in the popularity of Mexican cuisine and music throughout the United States. In the decades following World War II, the United States experienced another wave of immigration, with people arriving from all corners of the globe. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 eliminated the discriminatory national origin quotas, leading to increased immigration from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Today, immigrants from countries such as India, China, the Philippines, and many others continue to make significant contributions to American society. As we move forward in our exploration of American history, we will delve into the complex and often painful experiences of African Americans. We will examine their struggle for civil rights, their cultural contributions, and their ongoing fight against institutional racism.
Chapter 8. Black Americans. African Americans have a long and complex history in the United States, beginning with the forced migration of enslaved people from Africa. They have faced institutional racism and fought for civil rights, contributing greatly to American society, culture, and politics. The first Africans arrived in the English colonies in 1619, brought to the shores of Virginia as enslaved laborers. Over the next 2 centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas through the brutal transatlantic slave trade. Enduring unimaginable suffering and separation from their families and cultures. Enslaved Africans were forced to work on plantations throughout the American South, where they cultivated crops such as tobacco, rice, and cotton. They lived under harsh conditions, subjected to brutal punishments, and denied basic human rights. Despite these challenges, they developed a strong sense of community, maintaining cultural practices and traditions through music, dance, and storytelling. The fight to end slavery in the United States culminated in the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, a conflict that pitted the Union, Northern states, against the Confederacy, Southern states. The Union's victory led to the abolition of slavery through the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. However, the end of slavery did not mean the end of racial oppression for African Americans. During the Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877, the federal government attempted to implement policies to help newly freed Black Americans, such as granting them the right to vote and providing education. However, Southern states quickly enacted discriminatory laws known as Black Codes to restrict their rights, and white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan used violence to intimidate and terrorize them. The early 20th century saw the Great Migration, a mass movement of African Americans from the rural South to urban areas in the North, Midwest, and West. They sought better job opportunities and an escape from the harsh segregationist policies of the South. This migration led to the growth of vibrant Black communities in cities such as New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. The 1950s and 1960s marked the height of the civil rights movement, a struggle for racial equality led by courageous activists like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X. Through nonviolent protests, legal challenges, and grassroots organizing, the movement achieved significant victories, including the desegregation of public schools, the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. African Americans have made invaluable contributions to American culture and society, excelling in fields such as literature, music, and sports. Writers like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston were part of the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural movement of the 1920s that celebrated Black art and creativity. Iconic musicians like Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, and Chuck Berry transformed American music, while athletes like Jackie Robinson and Serena Williams broke racial barriers and inspired millions. In the next chapter, we will explore the government of the United States and the way it is structured to maintain balance and protect the rights of its citizens.
Chapter 9. The Government of the USA. The United States has a federal system of government with power divided between the national, state, and local levels. The Constitution established 3 branches of government: the executive, headed by the President, the legislative, Congress, and the judicial, Supreme Court. The U.S. Constitution, adopted in 1787, established the framework for the nation's government. It outlines the responsibilities and powers of the 3 branches, as well as the system of checks and balances to prevent any single branch from becoming too powerful. The executive branch is led by the President, who serves as the nation's head of state and chief executive officer. The President is responsible for enforcing federal laws, conducting foreign policy, and commanding the armed forces. The President is elected to a 4-year term and can serve a maximum of 2 terms. The Vice President supports the President and assumes the role if the President is unable to fulfill their duties. The legislative branch, known as Congress, consists of 2 chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House has 435 members, with each state's representation based on its population. Representatives serve 2-year terms and can be re-elected indefinitely. The Senate has 100 members, with 2 senators from each state. Senators serve 6-year terms, with 1/3 of the Senate up for election every 2 years. Congress is responsible for making federal laws regulating commerce, declaring war, and overseeing the federal budget. Through the system of checks and balances, the President can veto bills passed by Congress, while Congress can override a veto with a 2/3 majority vote in both chambers. Additionally, the Senate must confirm presidential appointments, including those to the Supreme Court. The judicial branch, headed by the Supreme Court, interprets the Constitution and federal laws. The court consists of 9 justices, nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Justices serve lifetime appointments, providing them with independence from political pressures. The court's decisions have far-reaching impacts on American society, shaping the interpretation of civil rights, individual liberties, and the scope of government power. State and local governments play essential roles in the federal system. Each state has its own constitution and government structure, generally mirroring the national model with executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Local governments, such as city and county governments, manage community-specific issues like public safety, education, and infrastructure. In the next chapter, we will discuss life in the United States, focusing on the values, culture, and challenges faced by Americans in their everyday lives.
Chapter 10. Living in the USA. The United States is a diverse and dynamic country with a high standard of living. Americans value individualism, hard work, and freedom. They face challenges related to healthcare, education, and social inequalities. Life in the United States is shaped by a variety of factors, including its rich history, cultural diversity, and economic opportunities. The country is known for its entrepreneurial spirit, which has led to innovations in various fields, such as technology, entertainment, and science. American values emphasize individualism and personal freedom. The idea of the American dream has long been a driving force in the country, with many people believing that hard work and determination can lead to success and a better life. This has attracted immigrants from around the world, seeking opportunities and a chance to build a brighter future for themselves and their families. Education plays a significant role in American society, with many people striving to attain a higher level of education to improve their job prospects and quality of life. The United States has some of the world's top universities, but access to quality education can vary depending on factors such as location, income, and race. Many Americans face challenges related to student loan debt and the rising cost of college tuition. Healthcare is another critical issue in the United States. While the country has advanced medical facilities and research institutions, access to healthcare can be challenging due to high costs and a lack of universal coverage. The Affordable Care Act, enacted in 2010, aimed to address some of these issues, but healthcare remains a contentious topic in American politics. Social inequalities persist in the United States, with disparities in income, educational opportunities, and access to resources affecting different segments of the population. Many communities face challenges related to poverty, unemployment, and crime. Efforts to address these issues include social welfare programs, community outreach, and advocacy for policy reform. In the next chapter, we will explore American cuisine and its diverse influences, from regional traditions to the various immigrant communities that have contributed to the country's culinary landscape. We will also discuss the popularity of fast food and the growing interest in organic and locally sourced food options.
Chapter 11. Eating and Drinking the American Way. American cuisine is influenced by the nation's diverse population and regional traditions. Iconic foods include hamburgers, hot dogs, fried chicken, and apple pie. Fast food is popular, but there is also a growing interest in organic and locally sourced food. The development of American cuisine has been shaped by various factors such as immigration, regional agricultural resources, and cultural exchange. Early settlers from Europe brought their culinary traditions, which were then adapted to local ingredients and cooking methods. The Native American population also influenced American cuisine, introducing ingredients like corn, beans, and squash, as well as techniques such as smoking and barbecuing. Throughout its history, the United States has welcomed immigrants from all over the world, each bringing their unique culinary traditions. This has led to a diverse and ever-evolving food landscape, with dishes like pizza, tacos, and sushi becoming integral parts of American cuisine. Regional dishes and cooking styles also play an important role in the country's culinary identity. For example, the southern United States is known for its soul food, which has African and European influences and typically includes dishes like fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread. In contrast, the Southwest region has a strong Mexican influence, with dishes like burritos, enchiladas, and tamales being popular. Fast food has become a significant aspect of American food culture, with chains like McDonald's, Burger King, and KFC gaining popularity both domestically and internationally. While fast food is convenient and affordable, it has also been linked to health issues such as obesity and heart disease. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in healthier eating options with a focus on organic, locally sourced, and plant-based foods. Farmers' markets have also gained popularity, offering fresh, seasonal produce and providing an opportunity for consumers to support local farmers and small businesses. Additionally, the farm-to-table movement encourages restaurants to source ingredients from local farms, fostering a more sustainable food system. In the next chapter, we will delve into the rich history of American music, exploring genres such as blues, jazz, gospel, rock and roll, country, and hip-hop. We will examine the country's role as a global leader in the music industry and discuss some of the most influential musicians who have shaped American music.
Chapter 12. Music from America. American music has a rich history, from the blues, jazz, and gospel to rock and roll, country, and hip-hop. The United States has produced many influential musicians and has been a global leader in the music industry. The roots of American music can be traced back to the diverse cultural influences of its inhabitants. Early Native American music featured instruments such as drums, flutes, and rattles, while European settlers brought their own musical traditions, which eventually blended with African rhythms brought by enslaved people. One of the first uniquely American music genres to develop was the blues, which originated in the Deep South in the late 19th century. The blues emerged from African American spirituals, work songs, and field hollers, and was characterized by its emotive lyrics and distinctive chord progressions. Notable blues musicians include Bessie Smith, Muddy Waters, and B.B. King. In the early 20th century, jazz emerged in the vibrant African American communities of New Orleans, Chicago, and New York City. Jazz was a fusion of blues, ragtime, and brass band music, characterized by improvisation, syncopation, and complex harmonies. Iconic jazz musicians include Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Ella Fitzgerald. Gospel music, which developed in the early 20th century, was a combination of African American spirituals, blues, and jazz. Gospel music has strong roots in the Christian church and is characterized by its powerful vocals and uplifting lyrics. Mahalia Jackson and Thomas A. Dorsey are among the influential figures in the gospel music genre. Rock and roll emerged in the 1950s, blending rhythm and blues, gospel, and country music. This energetic and rebellious music style became popular among young people and was personified by musicians such as Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard. Country music has its origins in the folk music of early European settlers, particularly from the British Isles. This music style evolved over time, incorporating elements from blues and gospel music. Key country musicians include Johnny Cash, Dolly Parton, and Willie Nelson. Hip-hop originated in the 1970s in the African American and Latinx communities of the Bronx, New York City. This innovative genre encompasses rapping, DJing, breakdancing, and graffiti art. Influential hip-hop artists include Grandmaster Flash, Run DMC, and Tupac Shakur. In the next chapter, we will explore some of America's great cities, including New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Francisco. Each of these cities has its own unique culture, architecture, and attractions, reflecting the diverse and dynamic nature of the United States.
Chapter 13. Some great American cities. New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Francisco are among the nation's most iconic cities, each with its own unique culture, architecture, and attractions. New York City, located in the state of New York, is the most populous city in the United States. Known as the Big Apple. It is a global hub for finance, media, and culture. The city comprises 5 boroughs: Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. Iconic landmarks in New York City include the Statue of Liberty, Times Square, Central Park, and the Empire State Building. The city's rich cultural history is reflected in its diverse neighborhoods, such as Little Italy, Chinatown, and Harlem. Los Angeles, situated in Southern California, is the second most populous city in the United States. Known for its Mediterranean climate and the glamour of Hollywood, Los Angeles is a center for the entertainment industry. The city is home to famous landmarks such as the Hollywood sign, the Walk of Fame, and the Griffith Observatory. Los Angeles is also known for its diverse neighborhoods, including Beverly Hills, Venice Beach, and downtown La. Chicago, located in Illinois, is the third most populous city in the United States. Known as the Windy City, Chicago sits on the shores of Lake Michigan and is known for its stunning architecture, including the Willis Tower, formerly known as the Sears Tower, and the John Hancock Center. The city is famous for its deep dish pizza and vibrant blues music scene. Chicago's diverse neighborhoods include the magnificent Mile, Wrigleyville, and the historic Bronzeville. San Francisco, located on the west coast of California, is a vibrant city known for its picturesque landscape, steep hills, and iconic landmarks, such as the Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz Island, and Fisherman's Wharf. The city is a center for technology and innovation, with nearby Silicon Valley housing many of the world's leading technology companies. San Francisco's diverse neighborhoods include Chinatown, the Castro, and Haight-Ashbury, which was the center of the 1960s counterculture movement. In the next chapter, we will explore the state of California, the most populous state in the U.S., and its major cultural and economic influence. Known for its diverse landscape, California is home to Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and renowned natural attractions like Yosemite National Park and the Pacific Coastline.
Chapter 14, California. Located on the West Coast, California is the most populous state in the U.S. and a major cultural and economic center. Known for its diverse landscape, it is home to Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and renowned natural attractions like Yosemite National Park and the Pacific Coastline. California's history is marked by the rich culture of its Native American inhabitants, who lived in the region for thousands of years before European arrival. Spanish explorers, led by Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, first reached California in 1542. The Spanish established a series of missions along the coast in the 18th century, which played a significant role in the colonization and Christianization of the indigenous peoples. In 1821, Mexico gained its independence from Spain, and California became a Mexican territory. The Mexican era saw the growth of large ranchos, which were vast land grants given to prominent families. The discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in 1848 sparked the California Gold Rush, leading to a massive influx of settlers seeking fortune. The population boom and growing tensions between the United States and Mexico led to the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, which resulted in California becoming a U.S. territory. California was admitted as the 31st state in the Union in 1850. The state's economy continued to grow rapidly, driven by agriculture, mining, and trade. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 connected California to the rest of the country, fostering further growth. Hollywood, located in Los Angeles, became the center of the American film industry in the early 20th century. The growth of the movie business attracted people from all over the world, making California a melting pot of cultures and ideas. Silicon Valley, situated in the southern part of the San Francisco Bay Area, emerged as a global center for technology and innovation in the 20th century. Companies such as Apple, Google, and Facebook have their headquarters in the region, contributing to California's reputation as a global leader in technology. California's diverse landscape includes beautiful natural attractions such as Yosemite National Park, which is famous for its granite cliffs, waterfalls, and giant sequoia trees. The Pacific coastline stretches for over 840 miles, offering breathtaking views and a variety of recreational opportunities. In the next chapter, we will explore some of the beautiful places to visit in the United States, from the Grand Canyon in Arizona to Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee and North Carolina, and the Florida Everglades. Iconic landmarks include the Statue of Liberty, Mount Rushmore, and the Golden Gate Bridge.
Chapter 15. Beautiful places to visit. The United States boasts a variety of stunning landscapes, from the Grand Canyon in Arizona to Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee and North Carolina, and the Florida Everglades. Iconic landmarks include the Statue of Liberty, Mount Rushmore, and the Golden Gate Bridge. The Grand Canyon, located in Arizona, is a breathtaking natural wonder that was formed over millions of years by the erosive forces of the Colorado River. The canyon is over a mile deep and up to 18 miles wide, with colorful layers of rock revealing Earth's geological history. The Grand Canyon was designated a national park in 1919 and attracts millions of visitors each year. Yellowstone National Park, established in 1872, is the world's first national park. Spanning parts of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, Yellowstone is known for its diverse ecosystems, abundant wildlife, and unique geothermal features, including the famous Old Faithful geyser. The park is home to the largest supervolcano on the continent, the Yellowstone caldera, and has over 10,000 geothermal features. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park, straddling the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, is known for its lush forests, diverse plant and animal life, and beautiful mountain vistas. The park is part of the Appalachian Mountain Range and is named for the smoky haze that often surrounds its peaks. The park is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a popular destination for hiking and other outdoor activities. The Florida Everglades, a unique subtropical wetland ecosystem, covers more than 1.5 million acres in southern Florida. The Everglades are home to a diverse array of plant and animal species, including the American alligator, the Florida panther, and the endangered West Indian manatee. The Everglades National Park, established in 1947, is the largest subtropical wilderness in the United States and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Statue of Liberty, a gift from France to the United States, is a symbol of freedom and democracy. Located on Liberty Island in New York Harbor, the statue was dedicated in 1886 and represents the hope and opportunity that awaited millions of immigrants arriving in America. Mount Rushmore, located in South Dakota, is a massive sculpture carved into the Black Hills granite. Completed in 1941, the monument features the faces of 4 U.S. presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. These presidents were chosen for their significant contributions to American history and values. The Golden Gate Bridge, an iconic symbol of San Francisco and the West Coast, spans the entrance to the San Francisco Bay. Completed in 1937, the bridge was an engineering marvel of its time and remains one of the most photographed landmarks in the United States. In the next chapter, we will explore the diverse climates and ecosystems of the United States, from the scorching deserts of the Southwest to the frigid tundra of Alaska, and from the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest to the tropical beaches of Hawaii. The United States is home to a wide range of environments, each with its own unique flora, fauna, and natural features.
Chapter 16. Hot and Cold, Big and Small. The U.S. spans a vast area, resulting in diverse climates and ecosystems. From the scorching deserts of the Southwest to the frigid tundra of Alaska, and from the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest to the tropical beaches of Hawaii, the United States is home to a wide range of environments, each with its own unique flora, fauna, and natural features. The Southwest is characterized by arid deserts, such as the Mojave, Sonoran, and Chihuahuan deserts. These areas experience extreme heat and little rainfall, with temperatures often exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, during the summer months. The deserts are home to unique plant species like the saguaro cactus, Joshua tree, and creosote bush, as well as animals such as the Gila monster, roadrunner, and desert tortoise. Alaska, the largest and northernmost state, is known for its frigid tundra and subarctic climate. Winters are long and harsh, with temperatures plunging well below freezing, while summers are cool and short. The Arctic tundra is home to animals such as the polar bear, caribou, and Arctic fox, as well as unique plant life adapted to the cold, like the Arctic willow and mosses. The Pacific Northwest, encompassing the states of Washington and Oregon, is known for its dense forests, abundant rainfall, and cool, mild climate. The region's coniferous forests are dominated by towering trees like the Douglas fir, western red cedar, and Sitka spruce. The lush, green landscapes support a variety of wildlife, including the American black bear, elk, and bald eagle. Hawaii, a chain of volcanic islands in the Pacific Ocean, boasts a tropical climate with warm temperatures year-round. The islands are home to unique ecosystems and a high degree of biodiversity, with many species found nowhere else on Earth. Among Hawaii's native flora are the iconic Hialeah tree, the silversword plant, and various species of hibiscus. The islands support a diverse array of fauna, including the Hawaiian monk seal and an Hawaiian goose, and the colorful coral reefs teeming with marine life. The variety of climates and ecosystems found across the United States contributes to the nation's rich natural heritage. This diversity not only provides a wide range of habitats for plants and animals but also offers countless opportunities for outdoor recreation and exploration, from hiking through the forests of the Pacific Northwest to basking on the sun-soaked beaches of Hawaii.
Chapter 1. My story begins. In 1825, I was 10 years old. My father and mother were dead. I lived with my aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Reed. Their house was called Gateshead Hall. The house was in Yorkshire, in the north of England. My aunt and Uncle Reed had 2 children, a boy, John, and a girl, Eliza. I liked my Uncle Reed and he liked me. But in 1825, my uncle died. After that, I was very unhappy. My Aunt Reed did not like me. And John and Eliza were unkind to me. It was a cold, rainy day in December. All of us were in the house. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to read. I opened a book. Then I heard my cousin John's voice.
Jane! Jane Eyre! Where are you?
John shouted. He came into the room and he saw me.
Why are you reading my book?
He asked.
Give it to me.
John took the book. He hit my head with it. I screamed. John hit me again. I pulled his hair and I kicked him.
Help! Help, Mama!
John shouted.
Jane Eyre is hurting me.
Aunt Reed ran into the room. She pulled me away from John.
John hit me with the book.
I said.
I hate him, and I hate you too.
You are a bad girl, Jane,
my aunt said.
Why do you hate me? You don't like me?
I replied.
John and Eliza were unkind to me. I want to leave Gateshead Hall.
You want to leave.
Aunt Reed said.
Where will you go? Your parents are dead. You cannot live alone.
Aunt Reed thought for a moment.
My friend, Mr. Brocklehurst, is the owner of a school,
she said.
I will send you to Mr. Brocklehurst's school.
A few days later, Mr. Brocklehurst came to Gateshead Hall. He was a very tall man. His eyes were dark and his face was cruel.
Jane Eyre,
He said to me.
God does not like bad children. God punishes bad children. Jane Eyre, God will punish John Reed.
I replied.
John Reed is man. He shouts at me.
That is not true. You are a liar, Jane Eyre.
Mr. Brocklehurst said.
You must not tell lies. And you must not live here with your cousins. You will come to Lowood School. You will become a good girl.
I want to come to your school, sir.
I said.
I want to leave this house.
Bad girls are punished at my school, Jane Eyre.
Mr. Brocklehurst said.
The girls work very hard at Lowood.
I will work hard. I will be a good pupil, Mr. Brocklehurst.
I said. 2 weeks later, I left Gateshead Hall. I went to Lowood School. Chapter 2 Lowood School. It was the month of January. I arrived at Lowood School at night. A servant took me up some stairs and into a big bedroom. There were many beds in the room. The girls in the beds were asleep. The servant took me to an empty bed. I put on my night clothes and I got into bed. Soon, I was asleep too. I woke up very early. A loud bell was ringing. The bedroom was dark and cold. I watched the other girls. They washed in cold water and they dressed quickly. There was a plain brown dress next to my bed. And there was a pair of ugly, heavy shoes. I washed quickly. Then I put on my new clothes. I was very hungry. I followed the other girls down the stairs. We sat down at long tables in a large dining room. Our food was terrible.
The food is bad again.
One of the girls said.
Stand up.
A teacher shouted.
Don't talk.
We stood up. We did not speak. We walked into a big schoolroom and we sat down. There were about 80 girls in the schoolroom. And there were 4 classes. The oldest girls were in the 4th class. I was in the 1st class. 4 teachers came into the room and we began our lessons. The lessons were not interesting. First, we read some pages in a book. Then our teacher asked us questions about those pages. After 4 hours, we went outside. It was very cold. Very soon, a bell rang. Lesson started again. 3 weeks passed. One afternoon, the head teacher came into the schoolroom. The head teacher's name was Miss Temple. Mr. Brocklehurst was with her. We all stood up. I stood behind an older girl. I did not want Mr. Brocklehurst to see me. Mr. Brocklehurst walked slowly round the room. Everybody was very quiet. And then I dropped my book. Mr. Brocklehurst stopped walking. He looked at me.
Ah, the new girl.
He said.
Come here, Jane Eyre.
Then he pointed at 2 of the older girls.
You 2 girls put Jane Eyre on that high chair.
He said.
Look at Jane Eyre, everybody.
Mr. Brocklehurst said.
This child is bad. She is a liar. She will be punished. Miss Temple. Teachers. Girls. Do not talk to this child.
Then he spoke to me again.
Jane Eyre, you must stand on that chair for 2 hours.
He said.
You are a bad girl.
That evening, I cried and cried. But Miss Temple was kind to me.
You are a good pupil, Jane.
She said.
And you are not a bad girl. I am your friend, Jane.
Thank you, Miss Temple.
I said. Lowood School was in an unhealthy place. The buildings were wet and cold. Mr. Brocklehurst owned the school. He was a rich man, but he did not buy warm clothes for us. And he did not buy good food for us. Everybody hated him. In the spring, many of the girls became sick. Some of them left the school. They never came back. Many of the girls died. That spring was a terrible time. We had no lessons. Miss Temple and the other teachers took care of the sick pupils. Mr. Brocklehurst had to buy better food for us. And he had to buy warm clothes for us. Mr. Brocklehurst never came to the school. The next year, Lowood School moved to a better place. It was a healthier place. There were new schoolrooms, new bedrooms, and a new dining room. The new buildings were bright and clean. The teachers were happy. After that, I was happy at Lowood School too. I was a pupil at Lowood School for 6 years. Then I became a teacher. I was a teacher at the school for 2 years. But I never returned to Gates at all. And the Reeds never wrote to me. Chapter 3, Thornfield Hall. In 1833, I was 18 years old. In the summer, Miss Temple left Lowood School. She got married. I wanted to leave Lowood too. I wanted a new life.
I will be a governess,
I thought. I put an advertisement in a newspaper. I had a reply to my advertisement. The reply was from Mrs. Fairfax of Thornfield Hall, near Millcote. Millcote was about 70 miles from Lowood School. Mrs. Fairfax wanted a governess for a little girl. I wrote to Mrs. Fairfax immediately. I was going to be a governess at Thornfield Hall. I traveled to Millcote in a coach. At Millcote, a servant met me. He took me to Thornfield Hall. At Thornfield Hall, another servant opened the door. She was smiling. She took me into a small, warm room. A lady was in the room. She was sitting by the fire.
Are you Mrs. Fairfax?
I asked her.
Yes, my dear,
she said.
And you are Miss Eyre. Are you cold? Sit by the fire, Miss Eyre. A servant will bring you some food. Mrs. Fairfax is very kind,
I said to myself.
I will be happy here. Will I see Miss Fairfax tonight?
I asked. Mrs. Fairfax looked at me. She smiled.
Miss Fairfax? No, no,
she said. Your pupil's name is not Miss Fairfax. Your pupil is Adele Varens. Adele's mother was a Frenchwoman. Adele is Mr. Rochester's ward. He takes care of her.
Mr. Rochester? Who is Mr. Rochester?
I asked.
Mr. Edward Rochester is the owner of Thornfield Hall,
Mrs. Fairfax said.
I am his housekeeper. I take care of Thornfield Hall. Mr. Rochester is not here now. He does not like this house. He is often away from home.
I was very tired. Mrs. Fairfax took me up the wide stairs. She took me to my room. I went to bed immediately. And I slept well. The next morning, I woke early. The sun was shining. I put on a plain black dress. I opened my bedroom door. I walked along a corridor and down the wide stairs. I walked out into the sunny garden. I turned and I looked up at my new home. Thornfield Hall was a beautiful house with many large windows. The garden was beautiful too. After a few minutes, Mrs. Fairfax came into the garden. She spoke to me.
Good morning, Miss Eyre,
she said.
You have woken early. Miss Adele is here. After breakfast, you must take her to the schoolroom. She must begin her lessons.
A pretty little girl walked towards me. She was about 8 years old. She spoke to me in French and I replied in French. After breakfast, I took Adele to the schoolroom. We worked all morning. Adele enjoyed her lessons and I was happy. In the afternoon, Mrs. Fairfax took me into all the rooms of Thornfield Hall. We looked at the paintings and at the beautiful furniture. We walked along the corridors.
Come up onto the roof, Miss Eyre,
Mrs. Fairfax said.
You will see the beautiful countryside around Thornfield Hall.
We walked up many stairs. At last, we were at the top of the house. We walked along the top corridor. Mrs. Fairfax opened a small door and we walked onto the roof.
Look, Miss Eyre,
Mrs. Fairfax said.
You can see for many miles.
We stood on the roof for a few minutes. Then we went back into the house. We walked carefully towards the stairs. The top corridor was narrow and dark. Suddenly, I heard a strange laugh.
Who is that, Mrs. Fairfax?
I asked. Mrs. Fairfax did not reply. She knocked on a door.
Grace,
she said. The door opened. Behind the door was a small room. A servant was standing at the door.
Be quiet, Grace, please,
Mrs. Fairfax said. The woman looked at Mrs. Fairfax. Then she closed the door.
That was Grace Pooley,
Mrs. Fairfax said.
She works up here. Sometimes she laughs and talks with the other servants. Don't worry about Grace. Please come downstairs now, Miss Eyre.
Chapter 4, Mr. Rochester. 3 months passed. I had not met the owner of Thornfield Hall. Mr. Rochester had not come home. One January afternoon, I went out and I walked towards the road. I was going to the village of Eyre. I was going to post a letter in the village. Eyre was 2 miles from Thornfield Hall. The day was fine, but it was very cold. I walked quickly and soon I was near the village. Suddenly, a big black and white dog ran past me. A moment later, a man on a black horse followed the dog. Then, I heard an angry shout. The dog ran past me again. It was barking loudly. I turned round. The horse had fallen on the icy ground and the man had fallen from the horse. One walked towards them.
Can I help you, sir?
I asked.
My horse fell. I've hurt my foot,
the man said. The horse stood up. The man tried to stand up too. But he could not stand. He fell onto the ground again. The man was about 35 years old. He was not handsome, but he had a strong face. He had dark eyes and black hair. He was not very tall, but his body was powerful.
I'll bring somebody from Thornfield Hall,
I said.
Do you live at Thornfield?
The man asked.
I am the governess,
I replied.
Yes, the governess.
The man said.
Help me, please.
The man stood up very slowly, and he put his hand on my shoulder. He walked slowly towards his horse. I helped him. He pulled himself onto the horse.
Thank you. Now go home quickly.
The man said. And he rode away. I walked onto the village and I posted my letter. Then I returned to Thornfield Hall. Bright lights were shining in the big house. I went inside. A big black and white dog walked towards me. It came from the dining room. I had seen the dog before.
Whose dog is that?
I asked a servant.
It's Mr. Rochester's dog.
The servant replied. Mr. Rochester has come home. But he has hurt his foot. His horse fell on some ice. I smiled. The owner of Thornfield Hall had returned. But I did not see Mr. Rochester again that day. I saw Mr. Rochester the next day. He sent for me in the evening. I put on a clean dress. I brushed my hair carefully. Mr. Rochester was in the large sitting room. He was sitting in a big chair. His right foot was on a small chair. Mr. S. Fairfax and Adele were sitting with him.
This is Miss Eyre, sir.
Mrs. Fairfax said. Mr. Rochester looked at me. He did not smile.
Sit by the fire, Miss Eyre.
He said.
Where have you come from?
From Lowood's school.
I replied.
I was there for 8 years.
8 years.
Mr. Rochester said.
That is a long time. Who are your parents?
I have no parents, sir.
I answered.
They are dead.
But where is your home, Miss Eyre?
Mr. Rochester asked.
I have no home, sir. I have no family.
I said.
Why did you come to Thornfield Hall?
Mr. Rochester asked.
I wanted to leave Lowood, sir.
I replied.
I put an advertisement in a newspaper. Mrs. Fairfax replied to my advertisement. Yes, I did.
Mrs. Fairfax said.
Miss Eyre is a good teacher, Mr. Rochester.
Mr. Rochester smiled for the first time.
You are very young, Miss Eyre.
He said.
I am 18, sir.
I replied. Mr. Rochester smiled again. He did not ask me more questions. After that evening, I did not see Mr. Rochester for a few days. Then, one night, he sent for me again.
Sit near me, Miss Eyre.
He said.
Mrs. Fairfax will talk to Adele.
I sat down quietly, but I did not speak. The fire was very bright. One saw Mr. Rochester's face clearly. I saw his large, dark eyes. He was smiling. He was happy. After a minute, Mr. Rochester spoke.
Miss Eyre.
He said.
You are looking at me very carefully. Am I a handsome man?
No, sir.
I said.
You speak the truth, Miss Eyre.
Mr. Rochester said.
Look at me again. Am I a con man?
No, sir.
I said again.
You are smiling now. But you are not always kind.
That is true.
Mr. Rochester replied.
I have had a difficult life. I have met bad people. I have been a bad person myself. Now, Thornfield Hall is my home. But I hate this house. You are very young, Miss Eyre. You cannot understand me.
You are right. I don't understand you, sir.
I said. I stood up.
Where are you going?
Mr. Rochester asked.
It is late. Adele must go to bed.
I said.
Are you frightened of me, Miss Eyre?
Mr. Rochester asked.
No, sir.
I replied.
But you say strange things, sir.
Mr. Rochester smiled.
Take Adele to her bedroom now, Miss Eyre.
he said.
We will talk again tomorrow.
After that night, we talked together many times. Mr. Rochester was an interesting man. But he was a strange man, too. I often thought about him.
Why does Mr. Rochester hate Thornfield?
I asked myself.
Thornfield Hall is a beautiful place. But Mr. Rochester is not happy.
Chapter 5 Fire.
It was March. One night I was in bed. But I was not asleep. The house was quiet. Suddenly, I heard a sound in the corridor outside my room.
Who's there?
I said. Nobody answered. Then I heard a strange laugh. I got out of my bed and I went quietly to the door. I listened. I heard another sound. Somebody was walking up the stairs to the top corridor. Then I heard somebody close a door.
Was that Grace Poole? I said to myself.
Yes, it was Grace.
Why was she laughing? And why is she walking in the house at night? Is she mad? I must tell Mrs. Fairfax about this. I will speak to her now. I put on some clothes and I opened the door. There was a candle on the floor outside my room. The candle was burning. There was thick smoke in the corridor. I went into the corridor. I looked around me. The door of Mr. Rochester's bedroom was open, and the smoke was coming from Mr. Rochester's room. I ran into the room. I sat in a chair by the window. Time passed. At last, Mr. Rochester returned.
Please don't worry, Jane,
he said.
Grace Poole is a strange woman, but she won't hurt anybody tonight.
I stood up.
Good night, sir,
I said. Mr. Rochester held my hand. He looked at me and he smiled.
Thank you, my dear friend,
he said.
You saved my life tonight, Jane.
Good night, sir,
I said again. I went back to my bed. I was very tired. But at first, I could not sleep. Suddenly, I understood something. I loved Mr. Rochester. He had smiled at me. He had held my hand. Did he love me? I did not know. But I thought about Mr. Rochester for a long time. I did not see Mr. Rochester the next day. He did not send for me. In the evening, I went down to Mrs. Fairfax's sitting room. The housekeeper was looking out of the window.
The weather has been good today,
Mrs. Fairfax said.
Mr. Rochester had a good day for his journey. His journey? Where has he gone?
I asked. I was surprised.
He has gone to Ingram Park,
Mrs. Fairfax replied.
Mr. Rochester will stay there for a week or more. He has many friends. All his friends will be at Ingram Park this week. Will there be any ladies at Ingram Park?
I asked.
Yes,
Mrs. Fairfax said.
There will be many ladies there. Miss Blanche Ingram will be there. Mr. Rochester has known her for many years. Is Miss Ingram beautiful?
I asked.
She is very beautiful,
Mrs. Fairfax said.
Will Mr. Rochester marry her?
I asked. Mrs. Fairfax smiled.
I don't know, Miss Eyre,
she replied.
I don't know.
I was very unhappy. I went up to my bedroom. I looked in my mirror.
Jane Eyre?
I said to myself.
You are not pretty, and you are poor. Mr. Rochester will never marry you, he will marry Miss Blanchingram. She is a rich lady, you are a poor governess. Forget Mr. Rochester, Jane Eyre, forget him.
Chapter 6 Guests at Thornfield Hall. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Mrs. Fairfax.
Mr. Rochester will return on Thursday,
Mrs. Fairfax said.
Some of his friends will come here with him. There will be many guests at Thornfield Hall.
On Thursday evening, Mrs. Fairfax, Adele and I were in Adele's bedroom. Mrs. Fairfax was looking out of the window.
The guests are arriving now,
Mrs. Fairfax said. I went to the window and I looked out. There were 3 carriages. 2 people were riding horses. Mr. Rochester was riding his big black horse. A beautiful young woman was riding a white horse. Mrs. Fairfax pointed to the young woman.
That is Miss Ingram,
the housekeeper said. Then she went downstairs. Adele wanted to go downstairs too.
No, Adele,
I said.
We cannot go downstairs tonight.
Mr. Rochester is talking to his guests. The next day, Mrs. Fairfax came into the schoolroom.
Mr. Rochester wants you to meet his guests tonight, Miss Eyre,
she said.
Adele must meet them too.
Later, Adele and I went quietly into the sitting room. And soon, 8 ladies came into the room. One of them was tall, dark, and very beautiful. She was Blanche Ingram. Adele ran towards her.
Good evening, beautiful lady,
she said in French.
What a pretty little girl,
Blanche Ingram said. Miss Ingram spoke to the other ladies. And she spoke to Adele. But she did not speak to me. Half an hour later, the gentleman came into the room. I looked at Mr. Rochester. He saw me, but he did not speak to me. Miss Ingram pointed at Adele.
Why doesn't this little girl live at a school, Mr. Rochester?
She asked.
Adele learns her lessons at home.
Mr. Rochester replied.
She has a governess.
Oh, yes. That small woman by the window,
Miss Ingram said.
I had many governesses. I hated all of them. They were all ugly and stupid.
Later, Miss Ingram and Mr. Rochester sang some songs together. Mr. Rochester had a fine voice. I listened to the songs, then I left the room. Mr. Rochester followed me.
What is wrong, Jane?
He asked.
Nothing is wrong, sir,
I said.
But I am tired. I am going to my room. Good night, sir.
You are tired. And you are unhappy too.
Mr. Rochester replied.
There are tears in your eyes. Rest now, Jane. But please come and meet my guests tomorrow evening. Don't forget, Jane.
The guests stayed at Thornfield Hall for 2 weeks. Every evening, I went to the sitting room with Adele. Nobody spoke to me. Mr. Rochester and Miss Ingram were always together. One afternoon, Mr. Rochester went to Millcote. He returned late in the evening. I met him at the front door.
Another guest has arrived, sir,
I told him.
His name is Mr. Mason. He has come from the West Indies.
Suddenly, Mr. Rochester's face was pale. He held my hand tightly.
Mason. The West Indies. Mason. He said.
Are you ill, sir? I asked.
Jane, my little friend, I've had a shock.
He said.
Bring me a glass of wine, please.
I went quickly to the dining room. I returned with a glass of wine and I gave it to Mr. Rochester.
What are my guests doing?
He asked.
They are eating and laughing, sir,
I replied.
Mr. Mason is talking to the other guests.
One day, they will all hate me.
Mr. Rochester said.
Now go into the dining room again. Tell Mason to meet me in the library.
I gave Mr. Mason the message. Then I went to my bedroom. I got into my bed. Later, I heard Mr. Rochester coming up the stairs with Mr. Mason. They were laughing and talking. Soon, I was asleep. Chapter 7, A Terrible Night. Some hours later, I woke up. A terrible cry had woken me. The moon was bright. Its light was shining through my window. I listened. Then I heard somebody shouting.
Help! Help! Rochester, help me!
The voice came from the top corridor.
Help! Help!
I got out of bed and I put on a dress and some shoes. I opened my door. All the guests were in the corridor outside the bedrooms. They were all asking questions.
What happened?
They asked.
Is there a fire? Who is hurt?
Where is Mr. Rochester?
I am here.
Mr. Rochester said. He was walking down the stairs from the top corridor.
What is wrong, Mr. Rochester?
Miss Ingram asked.
What has happened?
Nothing is wrong.
Mr. Rochester replied.
One of the servants has had a bad dream. Go back to bed.
I went back to my room, but something was wrong. I did not get into my bed. I waited. Soon, somebody knocked on my door. I opened the door. Mr. Rochester was standing in the corridor.
Jane, follow me. Do not make a sound.
Mr. Rochester said. We went up to the top corridor. Mr. Rochester unlocked a door and we went inside a room. Mr. Mason was sitting on a chair in the room. His face was pale. And his shirt was covered with blood. Then I heard a terrible laugh. The sound came from the next room.
Grace Poole is a madwoman,
I thought.
Why does Mr. Rochester have a mad servant?
Mr. Rochester spoke quietly to Mr. Mason.
I am going to bring a doctor, Richard.
He said. Then he spoke to me.
Stay here, Jane. Wash Mr. Mason's arm, but do not speak to him.
Mr. Rochester left the room. I washed Mr. Mason's arm. We waited for Mr. Rochester and the doctor. Mr. Mason did not speak to me and I did not speak to him. After 2 hours, Mr. Rochester returned. The doctor was with him. The doctor looked at Mr. Mason's arm.
She bit me.
Mr. Mason said.
I came up here. I wanted to see her. I wanted to help her. But she bit me.
Be quiet now. Richard.
Mr. Rochester said quickly. The doctor put a bandage on Mr. Mason's arm. Mr. Rochester put Mr. Mason's coat round the injured man's shoulders. Then he spoke to me again.
Run downstairs, Jane. Unlock the small door at the side of the houses.
He said.
We will follow you.
I went quickly downstairs and I opened the door. Outside the door, a servant was waiting with a carriage. Mr. Mason and the doctor came out of the house. They got into the carriage. Then Mr. Rochester came out of the house too. Mr. Mason spoke to him through the window of the carriage.
Help her. Be kind to her, Rochester.
He said.
Yes, I will, Mason.
Mr. Rochester said. The servant drove the carriage away.
Will you walk in the garden with me, Jane?
Mr. Rochester asked.
I do not want to sleep now. Yes, I will, sir.
I said. Soon, it was morning. The birds were beginning to sing. The flowers had a sweet smell.
It has been a strange night, Jane.
Mr. Rochester said.
Were you frightened?
I am frightened of Grace Poole.
I said.
She will hurt you, one day.
I am stronger than she is. She will not hurt me.
Mr. Rochester said. He looked at me for a few moments.
Are you my friend, Jane?
He asked me.
Yes, sir, I will be your friend forever.
I replied.
Thank you, Mother.
Mr. Rochester said.
I have made mistakes. Now, I want to be happy. That is not wrong, is it, Jane?
He stopped speaking for a minute. Then he said.
Go into the house. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
But the next day, I had a letter from Gateshead Hall, my Aunt Reed's house. The letter was from my cousin Eliza. I started the journey to my Aunt Reed's house immediately. I arrived there the next day. My Aunt Reed was very, very ill. She could not move. And she did not speak to me. I wanted to return to Thornfield Hall. I wanted to see Mr. Rochester. But Eliza wanted me to stay at Gateshead Hall. After 3 weeks, my aunt spoke to me at last. She spoke very slowly.
Are you Jane Eyre?
She asked.
Yes, Aunt Reed. I am Jane Eyre.
I replied.
There is a letter for you.
Aunt Reed said.
It is in my desk. Call Eliza, please. She will get the letter.
Eliza came into the room. She opened the desk and she gave me a letter.
Read the letter, Jane.
My aunt said. The letter had come from Madeira. But it was 3 years old.
I answered that letter.
Aunt Reed said.
I hated you, Jane. I did not want you to have your uncle's money. I wrote to John Eyre. I wrote Jane Eyre is dead. She died at Lowood School. I am sorry, Jane. I was wrong.
Mrs. Reed died that night. I left Gateshead Hall a few days later. I took my uncle's letter with me. Mr. Rochester met me at Thornfield Hall.
Welcome back to my house.
He said.
This is your home, Jane.
Thank you, sir.
I said.
I am very happy here.
Mr. Rochester's guests had left. No other visitors came to Thornfield Hall. Every day, Mr. Rochester and I talked together. And every day, I loved him more. Chapter 8 in the Garden. In June, the weather was hot. One evening, I walked into the garden. Mr. Rochester was there too.
Do you like this house, Jane?
He asked.
Yes, sir.
I replied.
Soon, Adele will go to live at a school, Jane.
He said.
Then, I will not want a governess here. Will you be sad then, Jane? Will you leave Thornfield Hall?
Leave.
I said quickly.
Must I leave Thornfield?
My dear.
Mr. Rochester stopped. He was silent for a moment. Then he said.
I am going to be married soon.
Oh, sir.
I said.
Then I must go far away. Far away from Thornfield. Far away from you, sir.
I started to cry.
I will always remember you, Jane.
Mr. Rochester said.
Will you forget me?
No, sir.
I replied.
I will never forget you. I don't want to leave Thornfield, sir. I don't want to leave you.
Don't leave, Jane.
Mr. Rochester said.
Stay here.
He smiled at me.
I am poor. I do not have a pretty face. But I have a heart. It is a loving heart, sir.
Jane, I'm not going to marry Miss Ingram.
Mr. Rochester said.
She is rich. She is beautiful. You are poor. You are not beautiful. But I want to marry you. Will you marry me, Jane?
For a moment, I could not speak. At last, I asked.
Do you love me, sir?
I do.
He replied.
Then, sir, I will marry you.
I said. And Mr. Rochester kissed me.
My dearest Jane.
He said.
Nothing can stop our marriage now. We will be married in a month, Jane.
We kissed again. Then I said good night and I went into the house. I went upstairs to my room. Later, I remembered my Uncle John Eyre's letter.
I will write to him in Madeira.
I said to myself.
I will tell him about my marriage to Mr. Rochester. I am very happy. My uncle will be happy too.
4 weeks passed. Mr. Rochester was going to buy me many beautiful things. He was going to give me many presents. But I did not want these things.
No, Edward,
I said.
I'm not beautiful. I don't want beautiful things. I want you, Edward.
It was the month of July. 2 days before our wedding day, Mr. Rochester went away.
I will return tomorrow.
He said.
I love you, Jane.
That night, I went to my bedroom early. My wedding dress and my wedding veil were in my room. I looked at them.
In 2 days, I will be Jane Rochester,
I said to myself. Then I went to bed. But I did not sleep well. The next day, Mr. Rochester returned. He looked at me carefully.
What is wrong, Jane?
He asked.
Your face is pale. Are you frightened?
I had a very strange dream last night,
I said.
It was a dream about this house. But in my dream, Thornfield Hall had no roof. The walls were burnt. They were black. In my dream, I tried to find you. But you were not in the house.
Are you afraid of a dream, Jane?
Mr. Rochester asked.
No, Edward,
I replied.
But I woke up from my dream. There was a woman in my room. She was tall and heavy. She had long black hair. The woman was holding a candle.
I said.
She put the candle by my mirror. She put my wedding veil over her head and she looked in the mirror. Then I saw her face. It was a strange, terrible face, Edward. Suddenly, the woman tore my veil into 2 pieces. She threw the pieces on the floor.
What happened next?
The woman held her candle near my face. She looked at me and she laughed. Then she went away.
This happened in your dream, Jane.
Mr. Rochester said.
It did not happen in my dream, Edward,
I said.
This morning my wedding veil was on the floor of my room. It was torn. It was in 2 pieces.
But the woman did not hurt you, Jane.
Mr. Rochester said.
Sleep in Adele's room tonight, my dear. You will have no more bad dreams.
Chapter 9, Mr. Rochester's Wife. It was our wedding day. We were going to be married in a church near Thornfield Hall. After the marriage, we were going to travel to London. I got up early. I put on my wedding dress and I went downstairs. Mr. Rochester was waiting for me. At 8 o'clock, we walked together to the church. The clergyman was standing by the door of the church. There were 2 other people inside the church, 2 men. They were sitting in a dark corner. I could not see them very well. The clergyman started to speak. At every marriage, the clergyman asks an important question. He asks the people in the church,
Is there a problem about this marriage?
The clergyman spoke loudly. He asked this question and he waited. There was silence for a moment. And then one of the men in the dark corner stood up. He spoke loudly.
There is a problem. These two people must not be married.
He said.
There is not a problem.
Mr. Rochester said to the clergyman.
Please go on with the marriage.
No, I cannot go on with the marriage.
The clergyman replied. He spoke to the man in the corner.
What is the problem, sir?
He asked. Mr. Rochester turned and looked at the man.
Who are you? What do you know about me?
He asked angrily.
My name is Briggs, sir. I am a lawyer.
The man replied.
I know many things about you. 15 years ago, you were married in the West Indies. Your wife's name is Bertha Mason. She is alive. She lives at Thornfield Hall.
How do you know that?
Mr. Rochester shouted. The other man in the dark corner stood up. He walked towards us. It was Richard Mason.
Bertha Mason is my sister.
He said.
I saw her at Thornfield Hall in April.
Mr. Rochester's face was pale. For a minute he was silent. Then he spoke quietly.
It is true,
he said.
My wife is living at Thornfield Hall. She is mad. Come to the house, all of you. Come and see Mrs. Rochester. Come and see the madwoman.
We all left the church. Nobody spoke. At Thornfield, Mrs. Fairfax and Adele were waiting for us. They were smiling happily.
Nobody will be happy today,
Mr. Rochester said.
We are not married.
Briggs, Mr. Mason, the clergyman and I followed Mr. Rochester. We followed him up the stairs. He took us to the top corridor. He unlocked a door and we went into a small room. I had seen this room before. We walked through the room to another door. Mr. Rochester unlocked this door and we saw a larger room. Grace Poole was sitting in the room. But another woman was there too. She was tall and heavy. Her dark hair was in front of her face. The woman turned and looked at us. I knew that terrible, mad face. I had seen it in my bedroom 2 nights before. The madwoman saw Mr. Rochester. She screamed and she ran towards him. The madwoman was very strong. She screamed and she hit Mr. Rochester. But Mr. Rochester held her arms.
This woman is my wife.
Mr. Rochester said angrily.
I wanted to forget about her. I wanted to marry this young girl, Jane Eyre. Was I wrong?
He was silent for a few moments. Then he spoke quietly.
Yes. I was wrong,
he said.
I love Jane Eyre. But I was wrong. Now go, all of you. I must take care of my mad wife.
I went slowly downstairs. Mr. Briggs, the lawyer, spoke to me.
I am sorry for you, Miss Eyre,
he said.
You did nothing wrong. Your uncle, John Eyre, is sorry for you too. He read your letter. And then he met Richard Mason in Madeira. Your uncle is dying, Miss Eyre. He could not come to England. He sent me here. He wanted me to stop this marriage.
I did not answer. I went to my room and I locked the door. I took off my wedding dress. I put on a plain black dress. I lay down on my bed.
I am Jane Eyre today.
I thought.
I will be Jane Eyre tomorrow. I will never be Jane Rochester. I must leave Thornfield Hall. I must never see Mr. Rochester again. My life here is finished.
Many hours later, I got off the bed. I unlocked my door. Mr. Rochester was waiting outside my room.
You are unhappy, Jane,
he said.
I am very, very sorry. Jane, we will leave Thornfield. We will go to another country. We will be happy again.
I cannot be your wife. I cannot live with you,
I said.
I must leave you, Edward.
Listen, Jane.
Mr. Rochester said.
My father wanted me to marry Bertha Mason. Her family was very rich. I married her. My father was happy. But I was not happy. Bertha was mad, and she was a bad woman. Nobody told me about her. She was married to me, but she met other men. She was drunk every day. She tried to kill me many times. After 4 years, I brought Bertha here to Thornfield Hall.
Mr. Rochester said.
Then I went away. Gray's Pool took care of Bertha. I met other women. One of them was a French singer. She was Adele's mother. Adele is my daughter, Jane. But I did not love the French singer. I did not love anybody. I came home to Thornfield Hall. Then you came here and I loved you. I will always love you. Please stay with me, Jane.
No, Edward,
I said.
I am going away. We will be unhappy. But we must not be together. Goodbye, Edward.
Oh, Jane. Jane, my love.
Mr. Rochester said.
Don't leave me.
I kissed Mr. Rochester.
God will help you, Edward,
I said. Quickly, I went into my room. I put some clothes into a bag. Later, I heard Mr. Rochester go into his room. Very quietly, I went downstairs. I opened the small door at the side of the house. I left Thornfield Hall and one walked to the road. It was dark. Soon, a coach came along the road. I gave all my money to the driver of the coach. I got into the coach. Many hours later, the coach stopped. It was 10 o'clock in the morning.
You must give me more money now.
The driver said.
I have no more money,
I said.
You have no more money? Then you must get out of the coach.
The driver said. I got down onto the road. The coach moved away quickly. But I had left my bag in the coach. I looked around me. I was on a cold, empty moor. I was tired and hungry. I walked and walked. I had no money. I had no food. I walked until the evening came. At last, I lay down on the ground. I fell asleep immediately. Chapter 10, More House. The next morning, I woke late. I walked along the road for many miles. It started to rain. Soon my clothes were wet. I saw no one. I walked on the moor all day. In the evening, I was very tired again.
I must sleep soon,
I thought.
Where shall I sleep?
Then I saw a light. I walked slowly towards it. The rain was falling heavily. But I saw a house near the road. I walked up to the house. I knocked on the door. I waited, but nobody opened the door. I stood outside the house. I was very cold and very tired. I could not move.
I am going to die here,
I said. Then I heard a young man's voice. The man was standing behind me.
No, you will not die at more houses,
the man said. Then he unlocked the door of the house. He took me into the house. He took me into a warm sitting room.
Please sit down,
he said. 2 pretty young women came into the room.
Give this poor woman some food, Diana.
The young man said.
Give her some dry clothes, Mary.
Then he spoke to me again.
My name is St. John Rivers,
he said.
These are my sisters, Diana and Mary. What is your name, young woman?
My name is Jane Elliot,
I said. I closed my eyes.
Jane is very tired,
Diana said.
She must go to bed now.
I stayed in bed at Moore House for 3 days. Diana and Mary Rivers were governesses. They were staying at Moore House for a few days. St. John, their brother, was a clergyman. They were very kind to me. Soon, we were good friends. One day, St. John asked me about my life.
I was a governess too,
I told him. And I told him about Lowood School. But I did not tell him about Thornfield Hall. I did not tell him about Mr. Rochester.
I want to work, St. John,
I said.
Will you help me? I have a plan.
St. John said.
A few miles from here, there is a village. Many of the girls in the village cannot read or write. I am going to pay for a girls' school in the village. But I must find a teacher for these girls.
I will teach them, St. John,
I said.
Good.
He said.
There will be a small house next to the school. You will live there.
3 days later, a letter arrived for St. John.
Diana, Mary, or Uncle John is dead.
He told his sisters.
But we will not have any of his money.
He gave the letter to his sisters. They read it.
Uncle John was our mother's brother.
Diana told me.
He was very rich. But he has given all his money to another niece. We do not know her.
Soon, I went to live in the village. I lived in the house next to the school. Every day, I taught the girls. My pupils worked hard. But I was not happy. Every day, I thought about Edward Rochester.
Does he think about me?
I asked myself. 4 months passed. One day, St. John Rivers came to my house. He was holding a letter. He was worried.
What is wrong?
I asked.
I want to ask you 3 questions, Jane.
He replied.
Is your name Jane Elliot? Do you have another name? Do you know Jane Eyre?
I looked at him for a moment. I did not speak.
I have some news for Jane Eyre.
St. John said.
Jane Eyre was a pupil at Lowood School. And she was a teacher there. Then she was a governess at Thornfield Hall, the home of Mr. Edward Rochester.
How do you know this?
I asked.
What do you know about Mr. Rochester? How is he?
I don't know.
St. John said.
This letter is from a lawyer. The lawyer tells a story about Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester had a mad wife. But he tried to marry Jane Eyre. She left Thornfield. Now, this lawyer, Mr. Briggs, is trying to find her.
I will tell you the truth, St. John,
I said.
My name is not Jane Elliot. My name is Jane Eyre. And I was a governess at Thornfield Hall. I know Mr. Rochester. Did Mr. Briggs write anything about Mr. Rochester?
No, the letter is about you, Jane.
St. John said.
Your Uncle John Eyre is dead. John Eyre has given you £20,000. You are rich, Jane.
But why did Mr. Briggs write to you?
I asked.
My mother's name was Eyre.
St. John said.
She was your father's sister, Jane.
Then you, Diana, and Mary are my cousins,
I said. I thought carefully for a moment.
Write to Diana and Mary,
I said.
They must come home. I will give all of you some of Uncle John's money.
The next day, I wrote to Mr. Briggs. I gave St. John, Diana, and Mary £5,000 each. I wrote to Mrs. Fairfax too, but she did not reply. 6 months passed. I heard nothing from Thornfield Hall. I heard nothing about Mr. Rochester. Then, one day, I was walking on the moor. Suddenly, I heard a voice. There was nobody on the moor. But the voice was calling my name.
Jane, Jane, Jane.
That is Mr. Rochester's voice.
I said to myself. Then I shouted.
I am coming, Edward. I am coming.
I ran to Morehouse. I spoke to my cousins.
I am going to Thornfield Hall tomorrow.
I told them. I began my journey the next day. Chapter 11. My story ends. 2 days later, I got out of a coach. I was standing on the road near Thornfield Hall. I ran across the fields. Was Mr. Rochester at Thornfield? Was he ill? And then I saw the house. The house had no roof. Its walls were burnt and black. Nobody was living there. I looked at the burnt black house. I had seen this before. I had seen it in a dream. I was frightened. Where was Edward Rochester? I went to the village of Hay. I asked about Thornfield Hall. I asked about Mr. Rochester.
3 months ago, there was a fire at Thornfield Hall.
A man told me.
The madwoman burned the house. She was Mr. Rochester's wife.
Was Mr. Rochester in the house?
I asked.
Yes, he was there.
The man replied.
He tried to save his wife's life. He went into the burning house. But the madwoman jumped from the roof. She died.
Was Mr. Rochester hurt?
I asked quickly.
Yes, he was badly hurt.
The man said.
He is blind, he can't see. And he has only one hand.
Where is he? I asked.
Where is he?
He is living at Ferndean. It is an old house, about 30 miles away.
The man said.
Do you have a carriage?
I asked.
I must go to Ferndean immediately.
I got out of the carriage near Ferndean. I walked to the house. I knocked on the door. A servant opened it. I knew her.
Oh, Miss Eyre. You have come.
She said.
Mr. Rochester has been calling your name.
A bell rang in another room.
That is Mr. Rochester's bell.
The woman said.
He wants some candles.
There were 2 candles on a table near the door. The woman lit them and she picked them up.
Mr. Rochester is blind, but he always burns candles in his room in the evenings.
She said.
Give the candles to me.
I said.
I'll take them to him.
I opened the door of Mr. Rochester's room. His black and white dog was sitting by the fire. The dog jumped up and ran towards me.
Who is there?
Mr. Rochester said.
Don't you know me, Edward?
I asked.
Your dog knows me.
I put the candles on a table. I held Mr. Rochester's hand.
I know that voice. And I know this little hand.
Mr. Rochester said.
Is that you, Jane?
Yes, sir, I have found you at last.
I said.
I will never leave you again.
Then I told Mr. Rochester my story.
Why did you leave your cousins, Jane?
Mr. Rochester asked.
Why did you come back to me? I am blind. I have only one hand.
I will take care of you, Edward.
I said.
But I don't want a servant.
Mr. Rochester replied.
I want a wife.
You will have a wife, Edward.
I said.
I will be your wife. I will marry you. I loved you very much at Thornfield Hall. Now I love you more.
Mr. Rochester and I got married. After a time, his eyes were better. He could see a little. He saw the face of our first child. My dear Edward and I are very happy.
Chapter 1. A Letter for Adam. One day a postman came to my village. The postman brought me a letter from my son, Saul.
Is your name Adam?
The postman asked.
Yes.
I said.
I have got a letter for you.
The postman read the envelope.
Adam of the village of Minta.
A letter for me. Who is it from?
I asked. The postman looked at the envelope again.
From Saul.
He said. He gave me the letter and walked away.
Martha, Martha.
I called to my wife.
Come here. We have a letter from our son, Saul.
Martha came out and looked at the letter. She was excited, but she was also worried. Short story in English, Martha.
A letter from Saul.
She said.
Is he alive and well? I'm going to find the school teacher. He can read the letter.
There was no school 50 years ago, so I cannot read or write. I live in a small village. The only work is farming. My only son, Saul, left the village 2 years ago, and my 3 daughters are married. Saul is making a lot of money in a foreign country. Short story in English, The School Teacher. Martha and the school teacher came back. A lot of other people came. Everyone wanted to hear my letter. The school teacher opened the envelope and read the letter.
20 Taylor Street, London E. 19, England, the 16th of March. Dear Father, I am living in London. I have a job in a factory. The work is very hard. I often work at night. But the pay is good. I am well and I live with people from my country. I am sending you £100 in this letter. This is for you and my mother. Love to you and mother. Saul.
£100.
I said to the school teacher.
You're wrong. It's a mistake.
No.
The school teacher said.
I'm not wrong. It's not a mistake. Here is the money.
And he gave me a piece of paper.
What is this?
I asked.
A money order.
The school teacher said.
Go to Darper. Take this money order to the post office in Darper. The money order is worth £100. The post office official will give you the money.
£100.
I said again. Everyone laughed and said.
Adam, you are a rich man. You can buy many things for your farm and for your house.
And I can buy some good food and drink in Darper. I am going to give a party for you all.
I told my friends. Martha said.
Saul is a good son.
That evening, the village people talked about the money order and my money. Martha and I also talked about the money. We needed many things for the farm. Chapter 2. Adam goes to Darper. The next morning I got up very early. It was dark and everyone was asleep. But I was going to Darper. I washed and dressed carefully. I put on my best clothes and I carried my best stick. I put the money order carefully in my pocket and I said goodbye to Martha. I walked 10 miles to the main road. I sat down at the main road and ate my breakfast. I waited for the bus. I waited for 2 hours. Then the bus came and I got on. It is a long way to Darper. The bus takes 3 hours. I arrived in Darper and walked to the post office immediately. I do not often go to Darper. I only know the market and one shop. This is the shop of Rick. I buy things for my farm from Rick. There were a lot of people in the post office. I asked about money orders. A man showed me the queue. There was a long line of people and I waited at the back. Finally it was my turn. I was at the front of the queue. But the official did not serve me.
Excuse me.
I said.
It's my turn. I'm next.
You are next, old man. I'm very busy.
The official said.
Look at my papers. Look at all these people. I am very busy. And you must wait.
So I waited. Finally, the official looked at me.
What do you want?
He asked. I gave him my money order.
This is my money order for 100 pounds.
I replied. The official held out his hand.
Identity card.
He said.
Excuse me. I don't understand.
I replied.
Your identity card.
The official said again.
Give me your identity card.
What is an identity card?
I asked.
I can't give you any money for this money order. First, I must see your identity card. Your identity card gives your name and your address. Your identity card describes you. There is a photograph of you in your identity card. I don't know you. Who are you?
The official was a little angry. But I was also angry.
Who am I?
I said.
Everyone knows me. I am Adam of the village of Minta. I haven't got an identity card and I don't need an identity card.
Old man, I'm very busy and you're very stupid.
The official said.
Who are you? Where is Minta?
Give me my money. Give me my 100 pounds.
I said. The official looked angry and said.
Show me your identity card. I don't know you.
The official gave back my money order and he turned away.
Where can I buy an identity card?
I asked the official. He did not speak to me. He did not answer.
Go to the Ministry of the Interior.
A man said. He was standing in the queue. And he told me the way. Chapter 3. An identity card. I walked to the Ministry of the Interior. I waited in another queue. I spoke to another official. I asked for an identity card.
Fill in this application form.
The official said.
And bring the form and 3 photographs of yourself and 2 pounds. Come back tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
I said.
Can I have an identity card today, please? I live in Minta. I live 5 hours' journey from Darper. I'm an old man.
Yes, come back tomorrow.
And the official turned away. I walked away from the Ministry of the Interior. I walked to the market. At the market, I looked at everyone. I was looking for a man from my village. But I could not find a villager. So then I walked to the shop of Rick. I spoke to Rick.
I want an identity card. I told him. But I need 3 photographs of myself.
I see. You need some photographs.
And he showed me the way to a photographer. I found the house. The photographer was asleep, but he came to me quickly. The man's clothes were dirty and he looked tired.
I need an identity card.
I said.
I want 3 photographs of myself.
Yes, you want 3 photographs of yourself.
The photographer replied.
And I take very good photographs. Come and see my camera.
Short story in English, The Photographer. We walked into his room. In the middle of the room was a large camera.
This is the best camera in Darper. This camera is very, very good.
The photographer said proudly.
I've never seen a camera.
I said.
I don't know about cameras. Hurry up and take a photograph of me.
Please do not hurry me, old man.
The photographer said.
I am an artist.
And he gave me a mirror and a comb.
I don't want a mirror. I don't want a comb. Please take my photograph. I'm going to Minta this afternoon. And I'm in a hurry.
I said.
Yes.
He said.
But first the price. This is the best camera in Darper, and I'm the best photographer. 3 photographs will cost you £2.50.
£2.50?
And I laughed.
£2.50 and pay me now, please.
The photographer answered.
I did not know the price of photographs. What could I do? Then the photographer said, You are an old man. For you, the price is £2.
So I gave him the money and he took the photographs.
Come back tomorrow morning.
He said.
I want my 3 photographs now, immediately.
I said.
Don't be stupid.
The photographer said.
Photographs take 24 hours. Come back tomorrow.
What could I do? So I said.
Yes. Tomorrow morning.
Good,
said the photographer.
Now go. I have a lot of work. I'm very busy.
I went back to the bus station. I sat on the bus for 3 hours. I walked 10 miles back to my village. It was night time and I was very tired. Martha and my friends were waiting for me.
Where is the money?
Martha asked.
I have no money. I cannot change the money order. First, I must an identity card.
And I told Martha everything.
Tomorrow I am going to Darper again,
I said. Then I did not talk again. I was very tired and it was late at night. I lay on my bed and I slept. Chapter 4. No photographs. I woke up late the next morning. The sun was already high. I did not walk to the main road and catch a bus. All the buses go to Darper early in the morning. So I stayed at home on Wednesday. I was still very tired. I rested and talked to the villagers about the money order. I told them about the identity card and the photographer. The school teacher said,
Yes, the official is correct. In a post office, you always show your identity card.
The school teacher filled in my application form for an identity card. Application form for identity card. Name, Adam Jamie. Address, Village of Minta. Age, 72 years. Place of birth, Village of Minta. Occupation, farmer. Color of eyes, brown. On Thursday, I traveled to Darper again. I walked to the main road and I caught a bus. In Darper, I walked to the house of the photographer. I knocked on the door of the house. No one came to the door. I knocked again loudly with my stick. A woman opened the door.
Who are you? What do you want?
She asked.
Can I have my photographs, please?
I said.
Your photographs? I have no photographs. The woman replied.
I came here on Tuesday. Where is the photographs?
I asked.
He's out. He's not here.
And the woman closed the door. I shouted at her.
I'm waiting here for him.
After a long time, the photographer came back. He looked tired and he smelt of beer.
Give me my photographs.
I said.
I have waited a long time for you.
The photographer looked at me and said,
I don't know you, old man. What photographer are you talking about?
My 3 photographs for my identity card. I paid you £2 for them on Tuesday. Give me my photographs immediately or my money.
Your photographs. Your money. What are you talking about?
The photographer said.
Show me the paper. Show me the receipt for your money.
My receipt?
I asked.
Yes. Where is your receipt?
The photographer asked.
You didn't give me a receipt.
I shouted.
Give me my photographer or my money immediately.
And I hit the photographer hard with my stick. I am old, but still strong. The photographer fell on the ground. He shouted.
Help! Help! This old man is killing me.
And I hit him hard again. Lots of people ran out of their houses. I hit the photographer again, and 2 men held me. I could not get away from the 2 men. The photographer was very angry, and I was very angry. Lots of people were shouting. Then a policeman came. The photographer shouted to the policeman.
This old man hit me 3 times with his stick. He's a thief and a murderer. He wants my money.
The policeman held my arm and said,
Come with me to the police station.
I did not say anything. We walked to the police station. At the police station, the policeman asked me,
Did you hit that man 3 times?
Yes.
I said.
He didn't give me my photographs.
Show me your identity card,
said the policeman.
I am Adam of Minta Village,
I replied.
and I haven't got an identity card.
Old man,
said the policeman.
go back to your village. Don't come here and fight. Keep out of Darper.
And he pushed me into the street. I went back to my village. I was tired and angry. Chapter 5. Adam changes his money order. Next day I told my story to all the villagers. The villagers were angry. Martha was very unhappy. She said,
Saul is working very hard. He is sending money and we can't have the money. What are we going to do?
I did not know. Then in the evening the school teacher came to my house again.
Adam. Perhaps I can help you.
The school teacher said.
Here is a letter to Mr. Sheth.
Mister?
I said.
Who is he?
He's an important man in Darper and he's a friend of my wife's cousin.
Replied the school teacher.
This letter is to Mr. Sheth. The letter is about your money order. Perhaps he can help you.
I took the letter and thanked the school teacher. So I traveled to Darper again on Saturday, for the 3rd time. After a long time, I found Mr. Sheth's house. The door was opened by a tall man.
Can I see Mr. Sheth?
I asked.
And who are you?
The tall man asked.
I have a letter for Mr. Sheth.
I replied.
I see. Can I have the letter, please?
And the tall man held out his hand.
The letter is here.
I said. And I took the letter out of my pocket.
But I must see Mr. Sheth.
Many people want to see Mr. Sheth.
The tall man told me.
He is a very busy man and a very important man. Mr. Sheth is not here at the moment. But give me your letter, and Mr. Sheth will read it later.
Short story in English, Mr. Sheth. I gave the tall man the letter. Then I waited. Later, a large black car came and a man went into the house. A long time later, the tall man opened the door again.
Come in now, please, and follow me.
He said. I followed the tall man. We went into a large room with fine carpets and big chairs. Another man was in the room. He was drinking.
This is Mr. Sheth,
said the tall man.
I am Adam of Minta Village,
I replied.
Yes, I know.
Said Mr. Chef.
Thank you for the letter. I hope I can help you. I like to help people. Please, sit down.
Mr. Chef smiled. His clothes were new and smart.
Thank you.
I said.
Can I see the money order, please?
Mr. Chef asked. I took the money order out of my pocket. By now, the money order was dirty and looked very old. I gave it to Mr. Chef.
This money order is for 100 pounds.
I said.
My son sent it from a foreign country.
Mr. Chef unfolded the money order and looked at it.
You can't change this money order.
He said.
This money order is not worth 100 pounds. This money is worth nothing.
Worth nothing. Worthless?
I asked. Then Mr. Chef looked at the money order again.
Yes, worthless. Your son does not understand about money orders. This money order is not correct for our country.
Mr. Chef said. Then he looked at the money order again and said.
And this money order is also old. It is out of date.
I said nothing. Mr. Chef gave me the money order back. Then Mr. Chef smiled and said.
I am very sorry. You are an old man. You came a long way from your village. What can I give you to eat and drink?
I was not hungry. But Mr. Chef went out of the room. Then he brought me some coffee and some cakes. I drank my coffee.
Old man,
Said Mr. Chef.
I like to help people. I am a rich man. Give me your money order.
I gave my money order to Mr. Chef.
Yes, this money order is worthless.
He said again.
But I am going to help you. I am going to change this money order for you. I am going to give you some money.
Mr. Chef went out of the room. I felt very happy again. After a few minutes, the tall man came into the room. He gave me an envelope.
This is from Mr. Chef. You can go now.
The tall man said. I went out of the house. I walked along the road to the bus station. I opened the envelope and I took out my money. I counted the money. It was 10 pounds. I thought about my only son, Saul. My son, Saul, had sent me a money order for 100 pounds. Mr. Chef had given me 10 pounds. I felt old and I felt poor again.